Chapter 516. 9,000 steps, 7,100 steps, 7,200 steps, 7,300 steps, 7,800 steps, 7,900 steps. At this moment, whether it was the leaders of the various forces on the platform or the many genius cultivators on the square, they all stared fixedly at the dot of light that represented LVE Tau. Everyone's eyes were filled with excitement and shock. It's already 7,900 steps, but LVE Tau doesn't seem to have slowed down at all. That's a little too abnormal. As expected of the number one expert of the younger generation in Wuxia County, he's actually far ahead of the person in second place, by almost 5,000 steps. The difference is really huge. That Zhuowen is actually not bad. It's already extremely terrifying to be able to reach 3,000 steps. However, LVE Tau is too terrifying. He's actually able to reach such a height. Countless uproars rang out on the platform and square. After witnessing LVE Tau's terrifying performance, Zhuowen's stunning performance from before seemed insignificant. At this moment, LVE Tau was several streets ahead of Zhuowen in both speed and height. Look, LVE Tau has reached the 8,000th step. He's so fast. It's only been half a day, but he's already crossed the 1,000th step and reached the 8,000th step. This LVE Tau is truly shocking. No one knew who shouted, but the geniuses in the square all burst into an uproar. They were all shocked by LVE Tau's terrifying performance. In the most spacious corner of the plaza, Luo Xing, Zhu Qi, Qin Batian, and Su Tianliang silently stood there. The four of them stared at the identity token in their hands as shock appeared on their faces. Brother LV has really hidden his strength well. I originally thought that the difference between us wasn't that great, but now it looks like it's like the difference between heaven and earth. Zhu Qi's scarlet eyes flickered when he saw LVE Tau reach the 8,000th step. He sighed softly and couldn't help but reveal a look of admiration on his face. The other three didn't say anything, but it was clear from their expressions that they were completely convinced of LVE Tau's strength. Although it was rumored that LVE Tau had only recently ascended to the ultimate emperor realm, the strength and results that LVE Tau had displayed were probably even more terrifying than an ordinary ultimate emperor realm expert. But what qualifications does that little bastard Zhuowen have to be second place? This little bastard must have taken advantage of this Zhongling mountain. Suddenly, Su Tianliang's gaze condensed on the light spot of the second place, and he coldly snorted with a gloomy expression. This Zhuowen is indeed a little strange. Didn't you notice that every time that kid crossed the 500th step, he would deliberately stop for a period of time? In other words, there must be some kind of secret or shortcut in Zhongling Mountain, and it just so happened that this Zhuowen discovered it. Zhu Qi's scarlet eyes flickered, and a trace of coldness appeared on his face. Obviously, Zhu Qi was extremely displeased that Zhuowen, who he had never taken seriously, had surpassed him. What you said is possible. When this Zhuowen entered Zhongling Mountain, his cultivation was only at the ultimate emperor realm. Even if he has the mental power of an initial grade 4, it's unlikely that he could compete with us, let alone surpass us. Moreover, I don't believe that this kid could have made consecutive breakthroughs in Zhongling Mountain. The most likely possibility is that this kid took advantage of the opportunity. Qin Batian nodded in agreement. Although the best explanation for Zhuowen's situation was that he had made consecutive breakthroughs, they were all very clear that the environment of Zhongling Mountain was too harsh. A cultivator wouldn't be able to cultivate in peace, let alone make a breakthrough. It was simply impossible. Luo Xing didn't say anything, but her beautiful eyes flickered slightly. Her line of sight secretly glanced at the light spot that represented Zhuowen in the token. No one knew what she was thinking. Brother Qin, Brother Zhu, for this Zhuowen to be able to climb so high in Zhongling Mountain, there must be a big secret in his body. After Zhongling Mountain is over, we will go to the 4th level to fight for the ancient inheritance. How about we get rid of this Zhuowen first? At that time, the secret on his body will be divided equally between the three of us. Su Tianliang rolled his eyes and suddenly greeted Zhu Qi and Qin Batian with a warm attitude. Oh, you plan to deal with this Zhuowen? Hearing this, Zhu Qi's scarlet eyes flashed, and his face showed a hint of interest. In his opinion, Zhuowen was able to climb so high because of his secret, not his strength. In the end, in his opinion, this Zhuowen was simply an insignificant person. The reason why he was able to surpass him in Zhongling Mountain was only because of luck. This Zhuowen is indeed interesting. If Brother Su is willing to take the lead, this Zhu is naturally willing to cooperate with you. Zhu Qi wasn't an idiot. Although he could freely act on the 4th level, he wouldn't be the one to take the lead. After all, Lu Nantian was extremely strict with the rules, so he still needed Su Tianliang to take the lead. Su Tianliang's face slightly changed. How could he not understand Zhu Qi's meaning? The latter wanted him to take the lead. If Brother Zhu can help me get rid of this Zhuowen, what's wrong with me taking the lead? Su Tianliang smiled faintly, but his eyes were filled with coldness. Then what does Brother Qin think? As he spoke, Su Tianliang's gaze fell on Qin Batian. I won't get involved in this matter. If you guys want to get rid of that Zhuowen, go ahead. Don't drag me in. Qin Batian shook his head. Qin Batian faintly felt that Zhuowen wasn't simple, so he didn't plan to join forces with Su Tianliang to deal with that Zhuowen. After all, he had no enmity with Zhuowen. Luo Xing, who was not far away, heard Su Tianliang's words clearly. Especially when she heard that they wanted to deal with Zhuowen, Luo Xing frowned and wanted to speak up to stop them. However, when she thought of the scene when Zhuowen rejected her invitation, Luo Xing felt an inexplicable discomfort in her heart. In the end, she didn't speak up and maintained her silence. Time slowly passed and another 2 days passed. Since Lve Tao climbed to the 8,000th step, he had stayed on the 8,000th step for 2 days. Obviously, the next step was quite difficult for him. At this moment, he was silently recuperating. During these 2 days, Zhuowen still did what he was supposed to do in Zhongling Mountain. Relying on the rule of the 500 steps, Zhuowen would absorb a limited amount of spirit qi in Zhongling Mountain every time. Then, he would silently climb to the 500 steps and repeatedly absorb spirit qi to increase the number of acupoints in his body. 2 days had allowed him to reach the 4,000th step. Such a height was enough to shock everyone. After all, Zhuowen was only an unknown genius. Anyone would find it inconceivable that he could reach such a height. Unfortunately, everyone's eyes were no longer on Zhuowen. Instead, they were focused on the light spot represented by Lve Tao. They all knew that Lve Tao was the most promising person to reach the top of Zhongling Mountain in so many rounds of the Tower of Vitality battle. They knew that they were likely to witness the birth of a new record. Everyone knew that the highest record of Zhongling Mountain was set by the number 1 genius of the previous Tower of Vitality battle, Lve Hantian. At that time, Lve Hantian had reached the 9,999th step of Zhongling Mountain. He was only 1 step away from the summit. However, this last step was the most terrifying step in Zhongling Mountain. Even the talented Lve Hantian couldn't withstand this last step and had no fate with the summit. But now, another genius who was comparable to Lve Hantian had appeared. That was the number 1 genius of the House of Marquis Qin, Lve Tao. He was also Lve Hantian's junior. Everyone wanted to see if Lve Tao could break Lve Hantian's record. Lve Tao moved. After resting for 2 days, Lve Tao finally moved. Moreover, his speed wasn't slow. He's really too strong. The pressure of 8,000 steps should be extremely terrifying. Lve Tao can withstand this pressure and move so fast. He's really heaven-defying. When the light spot representing Lve Tao finally moved, everyone's hearts seemed to be seized. Their eyes were fixed on Lve Tao's light spot. On the summit, slightly heavy footsteps slowly reverberated on the stairs. The indifferent expression on Lve Tao's face had long disappeared and was replaced by an extremely solemn expression. The pressure after 8,000 steps had reached an extremely terrifying level. It was as if thousands of mountains were pressing down on one's spine. No matter how confident Lve Tao was, he didn't dare to walk at night. He only dared to walk during the day when he had cultivated to the peak. I will definitely be able to break Lu Hantian's record and reach the top of the mountain. There I will be able to transform and obtain the power I want. The sound of heavy breathing continued to ring out. Lve Tao's expression was firm as he strode forward. His gaze pierced through the heavy fog and focused on the peak of the mountain. There, the towering stone statue became even clearer. He wanted to see what the stone statue on the peak of the mountain looked like. What did it look like? What was its origin? 8,100 steps, 8,200 steps, 8,300 steps, 8,500 steps, 8,700 steps. Slowly, Lve Tao steadily moved towards the 9,000th step. He knew that as long as he reached the 9,000th step, he would be able to have a good rest and readjust his state. Step over. I must reach the 9,000th step, I must. With a low shout, the aura in Lve Tao's body suddenly soared several times. His speed also increased sharply. He directly crossed the 8,900 steps and reached the 9,000th step. Huff. Gently exhaling, Lve Tao's face revealed a trace of relief. He smiled and said, I've finally reached the 9,000th step. I only need to recuperate on this step for a few days and readjust my state to the peak. Then, I will be able to sprint towards the last 1,000 steps. I wonder if Zhuowen has left Zhongling Mountain? I think he shouldn't be able to hold on. After all, it has already been 10 days. With his strength, it's unlikely that he can hold on for so long. As he spoke, Lve Tao took out an identity token from his bosom. His gaze gathered on the light spot in second place. Immediately, Lve Tao's expression stiffened. This was because he discovered that the light spot in second place had not dimmed. Chapter 517. Ignore second Zhuowen, 5,000th step. Lve Tao's originally indifferent expression also became slightly solemn. He also did not expect that Zhuowen was actually still able to endure the pressure of Zhongling Mountain after more than 10 days. Moreover, he had even climbed to the 5,000th step. He does have some ability to actually reach the 5,000th step. Although this Zhuo Wenluan's strength isn't high, his potential is really very strong. I really didn't expect that a mere brat from a low-level city would actually have such powerful potential. Lve Tao muttered to himself. Soon after, his eyes narrowed as he said in an indifferent voice. However, the 5,000th step is still not enough. It's far from enough. Although you've surpassed Luo Xing, Zhu Qi, Su Tianliang and Qin Batian, I, Lve Tao, am not someone you can surpass. After he finished speaking, Lve Tao closed his eyes. His face was still extremely calm. However, his slightly trembling eyelids revealed his current feelings. Clearly, Lve Tao's true emotions were not as calm as he had said. He had already felt a trace of a threatening aura from the light that Zhuowen represented. This was the first time Lve Tao had felt such a feeling ever since he became sensible. Ever since he was young, he was fully deserving of the title of Heaven's Pride. His pride, his conceit and even his condescension were all due to his powerful strength and talent. It was because he had the capital to be arrogant and conceited, even his condescension. Boom boom boom. On the 5,000th step, Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. A solid golden glow burst out, like a beautiful pillar of light in the dark night. I've broken through 240 apertures. The further I progress in the great Nirvana sun, the more difficult it is to break through the apertures. Even with the help of spiritual qi, I can only break through 10 apertures with the same amount of spiritual qi. A bitter smile appeared at the corner of Zhuowen's mouth. He had also discovered that the more apertures he opened, the more difficult it would be to break through the remaining apertures. In the beginning, Zhuowen could rely on a portion of spiritual qi to break through 20 to 30 apertures. However, he could only break through around 10 apertures now, sometimes even less. However, Zhuowen had also clearly discovered that although the speed of breaking through apertures had decreased, the more apertures he opened, the more obvious the increase in strength it gave him. Brat. Zhongling Mountain has a total of 10,000 steps. If you want to reach the peak of the mountain, I'm afraid that you still have a long way to go. That Lve Tao's strength is indeed not bad. He can actually reach the 9,000th step without relying on the spiritual energy inside. Blackie's voice suddenly sounded in the sea of consciousness, and he was praising Lve Tao. Zhuowen nodded. He admired Lve Tao quite a bit. Just by relying on his own strength, LVE Tao was able to reach 9,000 steps. From this, it could be seen just how powerful LVE Tao was. However, as long as LVE Tao has not completely reached the 10,000th step, then I have the confidence to surpass him. Slowly standing up, Zhuowen's eyes were filled with confidence. Although his strength was far from LVE Tao's, he could rely on the spiritual qi in Zhongling Mountain to constantly replenish his strength. Moreover, his strength was also subtly increasing. Therefore, as long as Zhuowen was given time, he might really be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Boom, boom, boom. Taking a step forward, Zhuowen walked towards the 550th step. His speed was neither fast nor slow, and he maintained a constant speed. Time quietly passed, and 3 days had passed. When the first ray of sunlight finally scattered from the sky, LVE Tao, who was dressed in white, slowly stood up. He raised his head slightly and stared at the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Today, I must reach the peak of the mountain and look down on all living things from the peak. LVE Tao's heart was filled with lofty aspirations. He lifted his foot and then placed it down, slowly walking towards the last 1,000 steps of Zhongling Mountain. At this moment, his speed was not fast, and it was even somewhat slow. However, every step he took was very steady, firm, and confident. The pressure of the last 1,000 steps was the most terrifying part of Zhongling Mountain. Even if it was him, if he was not careful, it was very likely that he would be covered with bruises from the pressure. Therefore, he had no choice but to be cautious. Step by step, the crisp sound of footsteps slowly reverberated within the stairs. LVE Tao's slender figure also slowly disappeared into the lingering clouds. He moved. LVE Tao finally moved. I'm afraid that LVE Tao is planning to climb to the peak of Zhongling Mountain today. If he can climb to the peak, then the record that LV Hantian set back, then will be broken today. Today we might witness a miracle. The peak of Zhongling Mountain, that has never been climbed before, might be done by LVE Tao. The moment LVE Tao moved, everyone was in an uproar. For 3 days and 3 nights, everyone's gazes were focused on LVE Tao. They knew that when LVE Tao truly moved, he would most likely head towards the peak of Zhongling Mountain. 9,050 steps, 9,100 steps, 9,150 steps, 9,200 steps. The current LVE Tao's speed could be said to be extremely slow. He did not seek speed but stability. As long as he could smoothly pass through the last 1,000 steps, it did not matter if he was slow. 9,250 steps, 9,300 steps, 9,350 steps, 9,400 steps. Time gradually passed. When half of the day had passed, LVE Tao had already reached the 9,500th step. Moreover, his speed had already become extremely slow. Clearly, the increasingly terrifying pressure of Zhongling Mountain had already affected LVE Tao quite a bit. Otherwise, it would be impossible for his speed to become slower and slower. On the 9,500th step, LVE Tao's expression had already become extremely solemn. The pressure here was so strong that it actually faintly affected the blood in his body. With every step he took, he could always feel the blood in his body boiling. His movements also became much slower and heavier. Huff huff huff. A slightly hurried panting sound came from LVE Tao's nose. Like an overly tired water buffalo, countless bean-sized beads of sweat continuously dripped down from LVE Tao's forehead like pearls, wetting his entire face. Let's see if I can cross the 9,501st step. If I can't, then I can only recuperate on the 9,500th step for a period of time. The 9,500th step happened to be a multiple of 500, so the pressure here was much weaker than the surroundings. The best way for LVE Tao to recuperate on this step was to recuperate. After all, he had been recuperating on this step for a while. LVE Tao's eyes flickered. He suddenly lifted his foot and fiercely stepped towards the 9,501st step. Suddenly, countless pressure like a deep-sea whirlpool continuously impacted LVE Tao's body. Poochie! With a muffled groan, LVE Tao could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. His body trembled. In the end, he did not step on the 9,501st step. Instead, he shook his head and returned to the 9,500th step. He silently sat down cross-legged. The last 500 steps. As long as I cross the last 500 steps, I will be able to reach the top of the mountain and enjoy the scenery that Lu Hantian has never experienced before. I must first adjust my condition. Although Lve Tao was eager to reach the top of the mountain, he also knew that he had reached his limit. If he did not properly recuperate, he was afraid that he would not be able to walk past the 100th step before exhausting all his energy. The last 500 steps. Wait for me. Lve Tao silently muttered. He closed his eyes again and began to recover his strength. When Lve Tao finally stopped at the 9,500th step, everyone on the platform had a trace of disappointment. They originally thought that Lve Tao would reach the top of the mountain today. It seemed that this kind of thinking was unrealistic. Now we can only wait. It is said that the pressure of the last 1,000 steps of Zhongling Mountain is the most terrifying. If you are not strong enough, the powerful pressure there is enough to crush you into meat paste. Even for a genius like Lve Tao, under such pressure, I'm afraid it would be extremely difficult. It seems that we can only wait for Lve Tao to move next time. Next time, Lve Tao should be able to reach the top of the mountain. Many people on the platform were filled with confidence in Lve Tao, because Lve Tao's performance along the way was simply too stunning, even more stunning than Lu Hantian back then. Back then, Lu Hantian was only one step away from reaching the peak of Zhongling Mountain. As for Lve Tao, who was even more stunning than Lu Hantian, in everyone's eyes, he undoubtedly had the strength to reach the peak. At this moment, Lu Nantian couldn't help but reveal a smile on his face. Even he was surprised that Lve Tao was able to reach such a height. It seems that Tao is hiding a lot of secrets. He was actually able to climb to the 9,500th step. It seems that breaking Big Brother Hantian's record is just around the corner. Thinking that Lve Tao might be able to break the record that had not been broken in Zhongling Mountain for thousands of years, Lu Nantian's eyes revealed a blazing light. Congratulations, Brother Lve. If Lve Tao is able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain, I'm afraid that there will really be great fortune. That's right. Not only will he break the record of the Essence Chi Tower battle, I'm afraid that he will also be able to obtain a lot of benefits. The other four giants also congratulated Lu Nantian one after another, their eyes filled with undisguised envy. They naturally yearned for a genius like Lve Tao, but unfortunately, Lve Tao was a genius from the house of Marquis Qin. Even if they wanted to rope him in, it was impossible. Hearing the praises of the other four, Lu Nantian waved his hand, but his face was brimming with a complacent smile. Lve Tao was so hardworking as his father, he was naturally very happy. I wonder how that Zhuan is doing. I haven't paid any attention to him these past few days. After regaining his senses, Lu Nantian suddenly thought of Zhuan, who was ranked second. In the past few days, because of Lve Tao's matter, everyone seemed to have forgotten about Zhuan. As he said that, Lu Nantian's gaze shifted to the second floor of the Golden Tower. Immediately after, he was surprised to discover that the light on the second floor was still dazzling. It was obvious that Zhuan had yet to leave Zhongling Mountain. Chapter 518. Boiling Hiss. Lu Nantian took a deep breath. Not only did the light spot in second place not disappear, but it was also emitting a blazing light. What surprised Lu Nantian even more was that the light spot representing Zhuan had already reached the 8,000th step. Lu Nantian's strange behavior was quickly noticed by the other four magnates. Following Lu Nantian's line of sight, the other four magnates also focused their attention on the light spot in second place. Then, the same sound of inhaling could be heard. Second place Zhuan, 8,000th step. 8,000th step? When did this Zhuan reach the 8,000th step? After a moment of silence, Su Chang finally could not help but cry out in surprise. A period of time ago, due to Lve Tao's valiant performance, Zhuan was basically forgotten by everyone because they all knew that Zhongling Mountain's ranking was already very obvious. The first place was undoubtedly Lui Tao. Although Zhuan was in second place, the gap between him and Lui Tao was too big. Therefore, when Zhuan surpassed Luo Xing, everyone's attention was no longer on Zhuowen. As the most promising person to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain, Lui Tao naturally attracted the attention of countless people. But now, no one expected that Zhuowen, who no one paid attention to before, would actually reach the 8,000th step unknowingly. He was only 1,500 steps away from Lui Tao. The commotion caused by LV Nantian and the others finally attracted the attention of the other people on the platform. Thus, everyone shifted their gaze from LV Tao to the light spot of the second place. Then, the platform suddenly became completely silent. 8,000 steps? How did this Zhuowen suddenly reach the 8,000th step? Wasn't he only at the 3,000th step? It's only been 5 or 6 days. Oh my god. Is this Zhuowen a freak? Even Luo Xing from Jade Lady Star Court only reached the 2,000th step. This kid actually reached the 8,000th step? Is my eyesight failing me? After a short moment of silence, an earth-shattering uproar and clamor ensued. Everyone was in an uproar as they stared at the golden tower. Disbelief filled everyone's faces, as if it was a beautiful scenery. Unlike the platform that was already in an uproar, Zhongling Mountain was extremely calm and serene at this time. On the 8,000th step, Zhuowen's body was overflowing with golden light. He took out his identity token and looked at the light spot in the first place. His golden eyes were full of confidence. 9,500 step? Unfortunately, the last 500 steps of Zhongling Mountain are not so easy to pass. I wonder if LV Tao will be able to pass them. After muttering to himself for a while, Zhuowen slowly got up. His entire body moved without any wind, and rumbling sounds continuously resounded from Zhuowen's body. At this moment, Zhuowen was able to display the great power of his physical body with every movement he made. At this time, the number of acupoints in his body had exceeded 300, and most of the veins in his body had turned into a dazzling golden color. Moreover, Zhuowen found that the combination of his mental strength and veins had not only improved his physical strength, but also his control of his body had reached an extremely terrifying level. For example, before, Zhuowen could only mobilize the power of his limbs and bones. Now, however, he could perfectly control every trace of blood and winding meridians in his muscles. He did not waste a single bit of power in the battle, and could exert every bit of power to the extreme. Maybe this is the principle of using 4 tails to overcome 1,000 caddies. This kind of perfect control over the body allows me to bring out the limits of the limited power in my body. As he gently clenched his fist, the ear-piercing sound of bones cracking continuously rang out. However, Zhuowen's face revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. This perfect control of power made Zhuowen feel extremely comfortable. The discovery of spiritual qi and the strength of the great Nirvana sun in his body allowed Zhuowen to be like a fish in water in the oppressive Zhongling Mountain. Zhuowen knew that he was still far from reaching his limit. Let's go. The great Nirvana sun will soon reach the beginner level. Out of the 365 acupoints in his body, there are only 65 acupoints that have not been broken through. As long as you break through the remaining 65 acupoints, I'm afraid that even an ordinary ultimate 4-wheel emperor will not be your match. Xiao Hei's voice slowly rang out in his mind. Its voice was filled with gratification. Even it was a little surprised that Zhuowen could reach the 8,000th step. Now, it was indeed looking forward to the possibility of Zhuowen reaching the peak. Tap tap tap. The crisp sound of footsteps rang out once again. Zhuowen nodded and continued to climb towards the peak with steady steps. His speed was neither fast nor slow, but it seemed steady and steady. He moved. Zhuowen actually moved again. I really didn't expect that this kid could still continue climbing after the 8,000th step. Looks like we've underestimated this kid. Perhaps he has the qualifications to challenge LV Tao. You're wrong. Zhuowen being able to reach the 8,000th step is indeed extremely inconceivable. However, compared to LV Tao, there's still a huge gap. Don't you know that the pressure of the last 1,000 steps of Zhongling Mountain is the most terrifying? Furthermore, when LV Tao was at the 8,000th step, his speed was much faster than Zhuowen's. When Zhuowen moved, everyone on the platform also let out a monstrous uproar. No one had expected that Zhuowen actually still had the strength to climb above the 8,000th step. This was really unbelievable. Many people even thought that Zhuowen already had the qualifications to challenge Lve Tao. However, even more people showed disdain. They didn't think that Zhuowen was a match for Lve Tao. Although many people outside praised and criticized Zhuowen, who was in Zhongling Mountain, naturally didn't know. Even if he knew, he probably wouldn't care too much. At this moment, he was thinking of ways to successfully cultivate the beginner level of Great Nirvana. Sunday time passed day by day. In the blink of an eye, another 5 days had passed. During these 5 days, Lve Tao still sat on the 9,900th step without moving. Obviously, he was still silently cultivating the state of his body. After all, the pressure above the 9,000th step had already reached an extremely terrifying level. Although Lve Tao was on the 9,500th step, and the pressure was much weaker than the surrounding environment, this was only relative. The pressure of the 9,500th step was much higher than that of the 9,000th step. Under the influence of such an extreme pressure, it wasn't easy to concentrate and adjust one's state. If an ordinary warrior was on the 9,500th step, not only would he be unable to concentrate on healing, he might even be directly crushed into meat paste by the powerful pressure. Even someone as strong as Lve Tao would need a lot of time to suppress the influence of the surrounding pressure in order to have the energy to completely adjust one's state. Therefore, if Lve Tao wanted to adjust his body's state to its peak, he would need a lot of time. During these 5 days, for the many masters of the various forces on the platform and the many genius warriors on the square, it wasn't so peaceful. This was because Zhuowen, who was originally ignored by everyone, actually climbed from the 8,000th step to the 9,000th step in these 5 days. He was only 500 steps away from Lve Tao. Especially when everyone saw Zhuowen's name constantly approaching Lve Tao's. Everyone's heart was about to jump out. It felt as if someone else was stepping on the door of their heart. 9,000th step? How did Zhuowen do it? 9,000th step. In the previous Vitality Tower battles, the number of geniuses who could reach such a high height can be counted on 2 hands. This time, 2 people actually appeared. Forget about Lve Tao. How did Zhuowen also reach such a height? This Zhuowen might be the biggest dark horse in this year's Essence Chi Pagoda battle. In this Zhongling Mountain, not only did he surpass the 4 super geniuses, Luo Xing, Zhu Qi, Su Tianliang and Qin Batian, he now has the qualifications to challenge the number 1 genius of Muqing County, Lve Tao. I really don't know if Lve Tao found out that Zhuowen is catching up. If he found out, I wonder what kind of mood Lve Tao would have. The moment Zhuowen reached the 9,000th step, the platform became as noisy as a tsunami. Everyone was discussing spiritedly, and the focus was on this young man, who came from a low-level city. On the 9,000th step, Zhuowen was sweating like rain. His body was covered in bloody mist, and he looked quite miserable. The pressure here had reached an extremely terrifying level. Even if Zhuowen's body was strong, he still felt that he could not bear it. That Lve Tao's strength is really strong. He can forcibly reach the 9,500th step by relying on his own strength. Slowly taking a breath, Zhuowen silently sat cross-legged. He knew that if it were not for the spirit qi of Zhongling Mountain, he would not have been able to hold on until now. Today, I will use the spirit qi below the 9,000th step to break through the remaining 45 acupoints. His eyes flickered, and Zhuowen's right hand formed a claw. He suddenly grabbed the step under his feet, and a palm-sized hole was instantly smashed. Kid, the amount of spirit qi needed to break through the remaining 45 acupoints is too large. At that time, I'm afraid that it will attract the attention of the weapon spirit again. At that time, you won't be as lucky as the first time. The weapon spirit of Zhongling Mountain will definitely not let you go a second time. Xiaohei suddenly said seriously. I must break through all of them. If I can't reach the entry level of Great Nirvana Sun, I'm afraid that I won't be able to reach the 9,500th step. I'm very clear about my own situation. Zhuowen's eyes revealed a trace of ruthlessness. The pressure after the 9,000th step had already exceeded Zhuowen's expectations. He knew that if he did not break through the remaining acupoints in his body and reach the entry level of Great Nirvana Sun, he was afraid that he would really be eliminated. This time I must fight. So what if I'm discovered by the weapon spirit? At most, I'll leave Zhongling Mountain before the weapon spirit catches up. Chapter 519. Breaking through all apertures. The last 45 apertures must all be broken through at this moment. All of them must be broken through. Countless blue mist-like spiritual chi were like monstrous waves, covering the sky and covering the earth as they violently gushed out from the steps that had already turned into fine powder. Zhuan silently sat cross-legged on the steps. Boom boom boom. Countless explosive sounds continuously rang out from Zhuan's countless apertures, bones, and meridians. At this moment, the golden color seemed to have penetrated deep into his bones. Zhuan was filled with a dazzling golden light from the outside to the inside. Zhuan, this fellow, is really too crazy. If he absorbs spiritual chi in such an unbridled manner, he will definitely be able to break through all the remaining apertures in his body. However, the artifact spirit in Zhongling Mountain will also completely notice you. When that time comes, how will you deal with it? In the middle of his sea of consciousness, Xiaohe looked at the youth sitting cross-legged with a complicated expression. Originally, it had rejected Zhuan's risky decision. However, the determination on Zhuan's face let it know that no matter what it said, Zhuan would not change his mind. Then I'll accompany you in your madness. When Xiaohe looked at the focused and serious expression on Zhuan's face, it suddenly smiled. The path of an expert was originally filled with death. On this path that was filled with corpses and bones, if one did not gamble with their life, they would eventually become mediocre and mediocre for the rest of their lives. A general success was built on thousands of bones. If one did not want to become a pile of bones by the roadside on the path of an expert, then one had to gamble with one's life. On this path that was filled with countless dangers and fear, one could not retreat, nor could one be afraid. One only needed to move forward, continuously moving forward. Zhuan waved his right hand. Instantly, the spiritual chi gushed out from the steps like a tide and drilled into Zhuan's body. A huge amount of spiritual chi endlessly drilled into Zhuan's Naiwan Palace, causing the mental energy in his Naiwan Palace to increase by several times. Bang bang bang. The muffled sounds of the acupoints being broken continuously came out from Zhuan's body. The strange sounds almost formed a rhythmic symphony. The 321st acupoint break. With a low shout, the golden light on Zhuan's body spread out in all directions. Immediately, crackling sounds rang out from his bones, and Zhuan's aura became even more powerful. The 322nd, 323rd, 330th, 335th, 340th, 345th, 350th. When the 350th acupoint was opened, the golden light on Zhuan's body was so dense that it was almost tangible. It was extremely dazzling, like a human-shaped sun. Roar, roar, roar. At the same time, the originally calm Zhongling Mountain began to tremble violently like a ferocious beast at this moment. Numerous terrifying and mournful beast roars roared out from within the entire Zhongling Mountain. Kid, be careful. The weapon spirit of Zhongling Mountain has finally noticed you again. Xiaohe's solemn voice slowly sounded in Zhuan's sea of consciousness. Hearing this, Zhuan's expression changed slightly. He clenched his teeth and stroked his right hand again, absorbing the spiritual chi at the bottom of the steps even more desperately. 15 more acupoints and his great nirvana sun would truly reach the entry level. 351, 353, 355, 357, 360 roar roar roar. This time, the beast roars from Zhongling Mountain were even more violent. The entire Zhongling Mountain shook violently, as if the sky was falling and the earth was splitting. At the bottom of the steps, a powerful force that Zhuan was familiar with suddenly rushed out, wanting to pull back all the spiritual chi that had leaked out. There are still 5 acupoints left. Don't think that you can take them back so easily. Seeing that this force wanted to take back the spiritual chi, Zhuan roared and slammed his right hand down. Countless golden veins crisscrossed on Zhuan's arm, The powerful force turned into a large golden hand in the void, and suddenly bombarded the force at the bottom of the steps. Boom! The large golden hand collided violently with the force at the bottom of the steps. Endless waves of air swirled, and a ring-shaped ripple spread out in all directions. Suddenly, the countless steps around were directly turned into dust under the powerful aftershock of the powerful force. Zhuowen spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face became extremely pale. His golden body faintly showed signs of collapsing. However, at this time, Zhuowen had opened 360 acupoints in his body. The strength of his body had almost reached an unparalleled level. Although he was seriously injured, he had temporarily blocked the force at the bottom of the steps. There are still 5 acupoints left. I must completely break through them. Forcefully suppressing the injuries in his body, Zhuowen pressed his right hand again. Another large golden hand descended from the sky and violently bombarded the bottom of the steps, completely sealing the exit of the force at the bottom. Then, Zhuowen seized the time and absorbed all the spiritual qi that was still gushing out from the steps into his body, preparing to break through the remaining 5 acupoints. 361st acupoint break. 362nd, 363rd, 364th acupoints, break, break, break. With a loud roar, Zhuowen was like a madman. His body was surrounded by golden light. Under the bombardment of the force at the bottom of the steps, his body faintly showed signs of collapsing. However, Zhuowen gritted his teeth and finally pulled through. This is the last acupoint. This time, I must break it. His eyes flickered. Just as Zhuowen was about to use the spiritual qi to break through the last acupoint, the 2 golden palms at the bottom of the steps burst open at this moment. A sharp beastly roar rang out. The power of the weapon spirit had finally arrived in front of Zhuowen. Boom! The power soared into the sky and finally turned into a large gray palm that was hundreds of feet wide. It crushed down on Zhuowen. Boy, run. Don't worry about the last acupoint. You have plenty of time to break through the last acupoint in the future. Now the weapon spirit of Zhongling Mountain is really angry. This power is not something you can contend against. Xiao Hei's voice rang out in his sea of consciousness. At this time, Xiao Hei could no longer remain calm, and hurriedly advised Zhuowen anxiously. No, I can feel that if I don't seize this opportunity, it may be very difficult to have such an opportunity in the future. This time, I must give it a good shot. At this moment, Zhuowen's eyes were scarlet red, and his face was filled with madness. His feet suddenly stepped forward, and Zhuowen's right hand suddenly struck out. Instantly, countless golden rays burst out. Golden veins appeared on the surface of Zhuowen's body in a crisscrossing manner. They constantly pulsed up and down, as if they had a life of their own. Zhuowen's aura also rose to the peak. I only need 5 breaths of time. As long as I can hold on for 5 breaths of time, I can finally break through the last acupoint. His eyes were filled with madness. Zhuowen clasped his hands together and suddenly pushed them forward. Instantly, the dense golden veins burst out and quickly intertwined in front of Zhuowen. In the end, they turned into a large golden net. Boom! Above the void, an enormous gray palm that was hundreds of meters long finally formed. Then, like a meteor, it rumbled and fell. In the blink of an eye, the gray palm finally smashed onto the large golden net. Blazing light continuously spread out like a balloon. For a moment, the entire Zhongling mountain trembled even more violently at this moment. It was as if the entire mountain was about to collapse. 5 breaths of time. I only need 5 breaths of time. Below the large golden net, Zhuowen shouted in a low voice. At the same time, he stroked his right hand and absorbed the little remaining spiritual energy at the bottom of the steps into his body. Then he skillfully guided the mental energy in his body to rush along the meridians in his body to the last acupoint. Breakthrough! You must break through! With a low roar, Zhuowen's eyes were filled with hope. He knew that as long as he broke through the last acupoint, he might be able to break free from the power of the artifact spirit. Boom! 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 The gray palm continuously smashed onto the large golden net. In just 3 breaths of time, the large golden net had actually become extremely dim, almost without any light. In the fourth breath of time, a cracking sound was heard. The large golden net directly shattered into nothingness, and the gray palm followed closely behind. Just a little more. Looking at the gray palm that was getting closer and closer, Zhuowen's heart was filled with a strong sense of danger. With a loud roar, he tried even harder to break through the last acupoint. When the gray palm arrived within an inch of Zhuowen's forehead, the last acupoint finally broke through. Suddenly, an extremely dazzling golden light burst out from Zhuowen's body. The blazing golden light fiercely broke through the gray palm and soared into the sky. Above the void, it continuously condensed and reformed, turning into a huge human-shaped shadow that was thousands of meters tall. The shadow had 4 heads and 8 arms, glaring angrily, and endless golden flames under its feet. Immovable Wisdom King. Raising his head, Zhuowen looked at the golden giant in the void, and the corner of Zhuowen's mouth could not help but mutter to himself. The immovable Wisdom King looked down at Zhuowen, who was like an ant, and his solemn voice echoed throughout the entire Zhongling Mountain. It's the great divine incantation, the great bright incantation, the supreme incantation, the supreme incantation, the unparalleled incantation, capable of eliminating all sufferings. Hence the Prajna Paramitha mantra. That is, the mantra is, reveal the truth, Paramitha reveal the truth, Paramitha reveal the truth, Paramitha monk reveal the truth, Bodhi sa poha. The obscure Sanskrit chants slowly reverberated. Then, Akala's huge foot stomped down, turning into countless golden torrents that surged into Zhuowen's body. Instantly, Zhuowen felt that his body was filled with endless power. This power made Zhuowen feel so comfortable that he could not help but roar at the sky. Zhuowen knew that the moment the Akalanatha phantom entered his body, his great son Nirvana had finally crossed the threshold. Roar, roar, roar. At this moment, Zhongling Mountain's artifact spirit finally went completely crazy. Zhuowen's resistance was considered a provocation by it. An even more powerful force suddenly gushed out from the depths of the steppes, enveloping Zhuowen. Go. Chapter 520. Competition. The instant Zhuowen moved, all the leaders on the platform focused their gazes on Zhuowen's dot of light. Everyone knew that if Zhuowen advanced another 50 steps, he would be on par with Lve Tao. After all, Lve Tao was still on the 9,500th step. Zhuowen moved again. I never thought that he would still be able to climb up after reaching the 9,000th step. This is truly inconceivable. Lu Nanshan's expression finally changed. Zhuowen's current performance had truly shocked him. It must be known that the pressure after the 9,000th step was truly terrifying. Even Lve Tao was somewhat unable to withstand the pressure. Look, how is this Zhuowen's speed so fast? He passed 5 or 6 steps in the blink of an eye. What's going on? Suddenly, there was a burst of noise on the platform, and a surprised voice reverberated throughout the platform. What? After the 9,000th step, this Zhuowen still has this kind of speed? He passed 5 or 6 steps in the blink of an eye. Hearing those words, Lu Nanshan's pupil shrank. His gaze immediately focused on Zhuowen's dot of light. When he saw that the golden dot of light on the golden tower was indeed rapidly ascending, Lu Nanshan's pupils shrank again and again. It's actually so fast. Just how did this Zhuowen do it? Lu Nanshan's entire body trembled. His eyes bulged out of their sockets, as he couldn't help but tremble as he spoke. If Zhuowen had reached this kind of speed when he was 2,000 or 3,000 steps, Lu Nantian wouldn't be surprised. However, this Zhuowen had actually reached this kind of speed after the 9,000th step. Lu Nantian couldn't help but be shocked. After the 9,000th step, the pressure in the Zhongling Mountain would reach a qualitative change. The pressure was so great that it was as if countless mountains were pressing down on one's spine. It was simply difficult to move forward. Even the extremely powerful Lve Tao's speed would be extremely slow after the 9,000th step. After the 9,000th step, this Zhuowen was actually able to reach a terrifying speed of 5 or 6 steps in an instant. Lu Nanshan's first reaction was that this was impossible. However, this kind of impossible reality had truly appeared in front of his eyes. All the leaders on the platform had the same expression as Lu Nantian. It was even more exaggerated than Lu Nanshan's. They naturally knew how terrifying the pressure after the 9,000th step of the Zhongling Mountain was. They simply couldn't understand how Zhuowen was still able to reach this speed. Zhuowen has already reached 9,200 steps. He's only 300 steps away from LVE Tao. Could it be that LVE Tao hasn't noticed? It's still at the 9,500 step. I'm afraid that LVE Tao was careless. The 9,500 step is already extremely close to the peak of the Zhongling Mountain. With LVE Tao's arrogance, I'm afraid that from the beginning to the end, he didn't put Zhuowen in his eyes. That's why he didn't even look at the identity token. If LVE Tao still doesn't look at it, I'm afraid that the first place will really be taken away by this Zhuowen. Everyone on the platform stared at the constantly rising light spot on the golden tower. They could feel that the hearts in their chests were constantly beating up and down along with the rising light spot. Everyone's heart was in their throats at this moment. They knew that the first place was now full of suspense. Whether it was Zhuowen or LVE Tao, both of them had the qualifications to compete for the first place. Even LV Nantian felt uneasy at this moment. LVE Tao was the #1 genius of the house of Marquis Qin. He naturally hoped that the first place would be taken by LVE Tao. However, Zhuowen's current performance was too strong. After reaching the 9,000th step, his speed could still reach such a terrifying level. It was really difficult for LVE Tao to take the first place. Just as all the masters of the forces on the platform at the top of the mountain were looking forward to the first place, in the huge square outside the Zhongling Mountain on the 3rd floor of the Vitality Tower, many genius warriors who had withdrawn from the Zhongling Mountain were looking at the huge Zhongling Mountain in front of them in shock. Roar! Roar! The beastly roars that were like monstrous waves resounded throughout the entire Zhongling Mountain at this moment. It was as if all the beasts that had been slumbering in the Zhongling Mountain had awakened. The entire Zhongling Mountain was trembling. The strong vibrations almost affected the standing square. Even some of the weaker warriors couldn't stand stably under the vibrations and were in a sorry state. What's wrong with the Zhongling Mountain? What the hell is going on? Puzzled expressions spread across the faces of all the geniuses. The sudden tremors of the Zhongling Mountain made them feel puzzled and confused. Su Tianliang frowned. This wasn't the first time that the Zhongling Mountain had trembled. Before they had withdrawn from the Zhongling Mountain, the Zhongling Mountain had already trembled once. At that time they didn't care. But now, the Zhongling Mountain was trembling again. Moreover, the intensity of the tremors was much stronger than the previous time. Su Tianliang already suspected that the abnormality of the Zhongling Mountain was related to someone in the Zhongling Mountain. This has never happened to the Zhongling Mountain in the past, but it has happened twice this time. I'm afraid that this abnormality is related to someone. Luo Xing, who had been silent, suddenly said. When Su Tianliang, Zhu Qi, and Qin Batian heard this, they all nodded in agreement. After all, they were the super geniuses of the 5 super forces. They knew much more about the Zhongling Mountain, which stood on the 3rd floor of the Yuanqi Tower, than the average person. If there was no external influence, it was impossible for any abnormalities to happen in Zhongling Mountain. However, it happened now, and it happened twice in a row. This abnormality could only be man-made, and it should be related to someone in Zhongling Mountain. Only Zhuowen and LVE Tao are left in the Zhongling Mountain. If the abnormality of the Zhongling Mountain is related to someone, then would it be Zhuowen or LVE Tao? Qin Batian scratched his head and said in a rough voice, Brother Qin, you think too highly of Zhuowen, don't you think? If it's related to someone, then it can only be Brother LVE Tao. After all, Brother LV is the #1 genius of the house of Marquis Qin. He is also the person who has the hope of reaching the peak of the Zhongling Mountain. Do you think that bastard Zhuowen can be compared to Brother LV? Su Tianliang suddenly sneered. The abnormality of the Zhongling Mountain had indeed surprised him, but he was very clear about Zhuowen's strength. How could he cause such a commotion in the Zhongling Mountain? Hearing this, Qin Batian and Zhu Qi both nodded. Although Zhuowen's results in the Zhongling Mountain were not bad, the gap between him and LVE Tao was too big. The only one who could cause such a commotion in the Zhongling Mountain was LVE Tao. However, Luo Xing frowned. She faintly felt that the abnormality in the Zhongling Mountain had something to do with Zhuowen. This was because when the Zhongling Mountain first shook, all the warriors in the Zhongling Mountain stopped in their tracks. Even Lve Tao was no exception. However, there was one person who did not stop. Instead, he quickly climbed up the mountain. That person was Zhuowen. At that time, Luo Xing faintly felt that the shaking of the Zhongling Mountain might have something to do with Zhuowen. However, this idea was unrealistic, so she did not take it to heart. However, now that the Zhongling Mountain was shaking even more violently, Luo Xing began to suspect that the shaking of the Zhongling Mountain was related to Zhuowen and not Lve Tao. I feel that the abnormality in the Zhongling Mountain should be caused by Zhuowen. Luo Xing suddenly said coldly, as she gently stroked the hair in front of her forehead. When Luo Xing's words came out, Qin Batian, Su Tianliang, and Zhu Qi suddenly became silent. Soon after, their gazes converged on Luo Xing. The expressions of the three people became extremely strange. It seems that the number one genius of our Jade Lady Star Court, the number one beauty of the province, Luo Xing, seems to be interested in Zhuowen. The matter is already so obvious. Yet you are still siding with Zhuowen? Su Tianliang suddenly said in a strange tone. Zhu Qi coldly stared at Luo Xing originally. He did not have a good impression of Luo Xing. At this time, he naturally would not give the latter a good face. However, Qin Batian simply smiled and said, Sister Luo Xing. Although that Zhuowen is not bad, the gap between him and Lve Tao is too huge. How could he have the ability to cause the Zhongling Mountain to shake so violently? That's right. Brother Lve has already reached the 9,500th step. As for that Zhuowen, he has long been left behind by Brother Lve. How could this child have such an ability? If you don't believe me, you can take a look at Zhuowen's current position. The corners of Su Tianliang's mouth were filled with a cold smile. He took out the identity token from his bosom, intending to find out Zhuowen's current position, to refute Luo Xing's point of view. However, when Su Tianliang's gaze converged on the second light spot on the identity token, his pupils instantly shrank to the size of needles. His entire person seemed to be frozen in place. Brother Su, what's wrong with you? Didn't you see the identity token? Then where is Zhuowen? I'm afraid that he has been left behind by Brother Lve. Zhu Qi and Qin Batian also discovered Su Tianliang's strange state. They hurriedly came to Su Tianliang's side, and their gazes landed on the second light spot. Immediately, their bodies trembled, and they actually froze in place. Their eyes seemed to protrude from their sockets, as they stared straight at the identity token in Su Tianliang's hand. The trio's faces were filled with a rich mix of disbelief, shock and disbelief. It could be said that it was extremely rich and colorful. Luo Xing also discovered the trio's strange state. Her long, shapely eyebrows slightly furrowed as she curiously took out her own identity token. However, when her gaze converged on the light spot on the identity token, her delicate body involuntarily trembled as her pretty face was filled with disbelief. This was because the first and second light spots on the identity token were actually extremely close to each other. Evidently, the difference between the first and second place was not that great. At the same time, a hubbub of noise rose from the entire square at this moment. Everyone had already noticed the two light spots that were extremely close to each other on the identity token. In an instant, the noise soared to the sky and reverberated around the entire square. The reason for all of this was because of the two remaining lines of information on the identity token. First place, Lve Tao, 9,500 step. Chapter 521. Lve Tao's nervousness and uproar like a monstrous wave boiled up in the empty square. Every genius martial artist in the square stared blankly at the information displayed on the identity token in their hands. 9,300 steps? When did Zhuowen reach the 9,300 steps? Isn't this too fast? Look, that Zhuowen's speed is very fast. He's actually closing in on Lve Tao at the 9,500 steps. Didn't Lve Tao notice that Zhuowen is closing in on him? If he doesn't notice it, I'm afraid he'll really catch up. Everyone's gaze was focused on the light spot on the identity token, especially the light spot that was closing in on Lve Tao. Everyone was sweating for Lve Tao. Clang! Su Tianliang's right hand shook, and the identity token in his palm suddenly fell to the ground. His gloomy face was full of disbelief. He never thought that Zhuowen would also reach above 9,000 steps, and was constantly shortening the distance between him and Lve Tao, who was in first place. This. Zhu Qi and Qin Batian also opened their mouths slightly. They didn't know what to say. They just stood there in a daze. Where did Zhuowen come from? How can a genius from a low-level city achieve such an unbelievable level? Luo Xing's beautiful eyes were filled with complexity. She increasingly found that the slightly thin youth gave her a mysterious and unfathomable feeling. Every time this child did something, it would always make her inexplicably shocked and even shocked the world. Boom! 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 The huge Zhongling mountain was like an enraged primordial beast at this moment. It violently rolled and shook, like a lone boat in the sea that could capsize at any time. On the 9,500 steps, Lve Tao, who was sitting cross-legged, had a pair of sword-like eyebrows tightly knitted. He stared at Zhongling Mountain in front of him with a solemn expression. Zhongling Mountain is starting to shake again. What's going on? What's going on at Zhongling Mountain? Lve Tao remembered very clearly that on the third day he entered Zhongling Mountain, there had been a similar tremor. However, the tremor this time was even more intense than the last time. It was as if the entire mountain was about to collapse. Zhongling Mountain wouldn't shake for no reason. Could it be related to that Zhuowen? That Zhuowen's potential is indeed not bad, but it shouldn't be enough to cause such an abnormality in Zhonglingshan. Feeling the violent shaking of Zhongling Mountain, Lve Tao suddenly felt uneasy. This feeling made him feel suffocated, as if something had been taken away from him. After hesitating for a moment, Lve Tao slowly took out his identity token. In fact, after entering the 9,000th step, he no longer intended to pay attention to Zhuowen. Although Zhuowen had reached the 5,000th step for the first time last time, there was still a huge gap between them. He didn't believe that Zhuowen would be able to reach the 9,000th step in a short 7 or 8 days. He even thought that Zhuowen might not even be able to reach the 6,000th step. However, Zhongling Mountain shook even more violently, causing Lve Tao to have no choice but to look at Zhuowen, who had yet to leave Zhongling Mountain. Although the abnormality of Zhongling Mountain should have nothing to do with Zhuowen, he still wanted to confirm it. Hiss. When Lve Tao's gaze finally focused on the identity token, his pupils constricted into needles. He couldn't help but take a deep breath and stand up with a swoosh. This was because the identity token showed that Zhuowen, who was in second place, had already reached the 9,300th step. He was only 200 steps away from him. This Zhuowen! Turning his head, Lve Tao's gaze pierced through the layers of clouds and shot towards the back of the steps. He seemed to be able to faintly sense that a figure was approaching him at a terrifying speed. Lve Tao's expression was unprecedentedly solemn. He had his pride, because in his opinion, no one would be his opponent in this Origin Qi Tower battle. If he wanted to compete, he would compete with himself, with the Lu Hantian of the past. However, all of this pride, at this moment, when he saw the light that represented Zhuowen on the identity token, all of it vanished. Lve Tao's proud heart was also shaken at this moment. He couldn't help but be shaken. He couldn't help but be shocked. He stared at the identity token in his hand. Ever since he became sensible, he had never cared so much about a person. Moreover, it was a lowly cultivator from a low-level city. At this moment, Lve Tao suddenly recalled the youth's figure that had slowly walked out of the golden door that had descended from the sky in the Mountain of Trials. He had surpassed Qin Batian, Su Tianliang, Zhu Qi, Luo Xing, and everyone except Lve Tao. Now he was only 200 steps away from him. Such a distance made Lve Tao, who had always had an indifferent expression, feel an unprecedented nervousness and throbbing in his heart. Zhuowen, I really didn't expect that you would be able to reach above the 9,000th step. I underestimated you before. You already have the qualifications to be my opponent. However, it may not be so easy to surpass me. Now let's let everyone see who is the true number one. At this moment, LV Tao's expression became unprecedentedly serious and passionate. He had stood at the peak of the younger generation for far too long. The loneliness of standing at the top was something he had experienced countless times. Now that a freak like Zhuowen had appeared, the surging battle intent hidden in the depths of LV Tao's heart had finally been aroused. Boom! LV Tao finally moved. His foot suddenly stomped on the 9,501st step. Instantly, a terrifying pressure formed into an endless spiral storm, densely crushing LV Tao's body. LV Tao's entire body seemed to have frozen. Break for me! With a low roar, LV Tao's foot stomped on the 9,501st step, and he continued to climb up step by step. His face was filled with determination and pride. Zhuowen, let's have a proper competition now. Step by step, he walked towards the peak of the mountain. Although LV Tao's expression was extremely calm, his heart was not as calm. In fact, he was still far from adjusting his body to its peak condition. He had originally planned to rest for 2 more days before heading towards the peak. However, Zhuowen's powerful arrival had destroyed this plan in his heart. At this moment, Zhuowen's entire body was flickering with golden light. Golden veins were like small snakes that covered his entire body. He had already reached the 950th step. Roar! 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 A deafening roar whistled from behind Zhuowen. The invisible sound wave seemed to have a strange magic power, as it spread to every corner of Zhongling Mountain. Looks like the artifact spirit of Zhongling Mountain is determined to bite me and not let me go, right? Feeling the powerful aura chasing closely behind him, and the beast roar that seemed to be close at hand, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a trace of worry. The pressure after the 9,000th step was extremely terrifying. At this moment, Zhuowen had already cultivated the Great Nirvana Sun to the entry level. All the acupuncture points in his body had been opened, and his physical strength was extremely powerful. However, under this pressure, he still felt some obstruction. Kid, this artifact spirit seems to be affected after the 9,000th step. Although its speed is faster than you, it's not much faster, so you should hurry up and leave. Xiao Hei's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Hearing these words, Zhuowen gently sighed. He had thought that the artifact spirit's power behind him would be as fast as last time. Then, it would be a matter of time before he was caught up. Thinking back to when he was chased by the artifact spirit, until he was in a sorry state, and was now able to deal with it with ease, Zhuowen knew that everything was just an illusion. It was not that the artifact spirit's power had weakened, but that he had become much stronger than before. Let's go. That LV Tao has also moved. I'm afraid that he already knows that I've caught up. Looking at the identity token in his hand, he saw that the light spot that represented LV Tao had finally moved. Zhuowen's eyes revealed a trace of fighting spirit. He did not know if he, who had opened 365 acupuncture points, would be able to defeat the number 1 expert of the younger generation in Wuxia County, LV Tao? LV Tao, then let me see how strong you, the number 1 expert of the younger generation in Wuxia County, are. As for the number 1 position, will you be able to keep it? Muttering to himself, Zhuowen's heart was filled with pride. His feet suddenly stomped and immediately, he quickly climbed towards the top of the mountain. He moved. LV Tao finally moved. He must have seen the identity token. He must have also seen Zhuowen, who was closing in on him step by step. It seems that LV Tao has already felt threatened by Zhuowen. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to change his own pattern and climb the remaining 500 steps. That Zhuowen is indeed abnormal. To be able to catch up with LV Tao, this child's talent is indeed terrifying. At this moment, all the warriors in the square realized that LV Tao's light spot, which had not moved for 5 days, had finally moved. They all knew that LV Tao had most likely discovered that Zhuowen was catching up from behind. Look, that Zhuowen's speed has also increased. I really did not expect that this Zhuowen could still increase his speed. What is his limit? Motherfucker, how can this Zhuowen's speed still increase? How deep is his potential? And the moment LV Tao's light spot moved, Zhuowen's light spot, which was in second place, actually sped up once again. Its speed was 20 to 30% faster than before. This speed had already stunned everyone's jaws. This is the final battle. The first place will be decided between Zhuowen and Lve Tao. I really don't know who will take first place in the end. At this moment, everyone in the square was nervous. If someone had asked them who would take first place in the past, they would definitely have answered Lve Tao without hesitation. However, the result of the first place was now full of suspense. This was because the biggest dark horse of this year's Essence Tower battle had appeared in the Zhongling Mountain test. This person's name was Zhuowen. Above the mountain, clouds lingered. On the thick steps, Zhuowen stood tall, his eyes filled with a rich light. Lve Tao, Zhuowen will take first place. Chapter 522. Crazy Demon 9, 350 steps. 9,400 steps. 9,450 steps. 9,500 steps. From the 9,350 steps to the 9,500 steps, Zhuowen's speed was extremely fast. In just half an incense stick's worth of time, he had already reached the 9,500 steps. Such speed once again shocked everyone in the square. They could not imagine how Zhuowen could still increase his speed when he had already reached such a high step. The instant Zhuowen stepped onto the 9,500 steps, the entire Zhongling mountain trembled once again, as if it had received an extremely heavy blow. At this moment, Lve Tao had only reached the 9,630th step. At this moment, Lve Tao's expression was rather miserable. An intense pressure covered the surface of his body, almost causing his body to collapse. Droplets of sweat poured down like rain without any regard for his life. At this moment, Lve Tao no longer had the indifferent and elegant expression from before. Between his brows was a dense exhaustion. He was panting, his hair was disheveled, the veins on his forehead were bulging, and the blood in his body was boiling uncontrollably. However, when his gaze gathered on the identity token, his eyes were filled with madness. This was because he discovered that Zhuowen, who was behind him, had unknowingly reached the 9,500th step. There was only a gap of 130 steps between him and himself. Zhuowen! Lve Tao suddenly raised his head and roared towards the sky. He lifted his foot and took another step, but his speed was much slower. On the 9,500th step, Zhuowen was also in a rather miserable state. The pressure after the 9,000th step was indeed terrifying. Almost every step could increase the pressure by several times. Even Zhuowen found it difficult to endure. Kid, just now, you desperately ran for your life and left the artifact spirit far behind. The artifact spirit's strength is probably 300 steps away from yours. If you stop at the 9,500th step, you only have 20 breaths of time. Seeing Zhuowen suddenly stop, Xiao He in the Sea of Consciousness naturally knew what Zhuowen was planning. He probably still wanted to absorb the spiritual energy here. Therefore, she very tacitly explained, 20 breaths of time is enough. Muttering to himself, Zhuowen's right hand turned into a claw. Golden light flickered as he slammed it on the steps under his feet. With a rumbling sound, the steps were blasted into fine powder. Waves of dense blue mist-like spirit qi gushed out like a geyser. Zhuowen didn't hesitate and directly absorbed all the spirit qi that leaked out from the bottom of the steps into his body. As the 360 acupoints in his body had already been opened, Zhuowen did not direct all of the spiritual energy into his Naiwen Palace. Instead, he divided the spiritual energy into two parts. One part was used to replenish the mental energy that he had expended in his Naiwen Palace, while the other part was used to replenish the physical energy that he had expended. The dense Ling Qi flowed into his body like rivers flowing into the sea. Instantly, an indescribable feeling of comfort spread throughout Zhuowen's body, causing Zhuowen to involuntarily let out a loud roar. With the continuous replenishment of the spirit qi, Zhuowen's fatigue gradually faded away and was replaced by an abundance of energy. 10 breaths of time passed in the blink of an eye. At this moment, the weapon spirit behind him was only about 150 steps away from Zhuowen. With the replenishment of the spirit qi, Zhuowen's mental energy had also reached its peak. Perhaps the weapon spirit behind him had sensed that Zhuowen was once again unscrupulously absorbing spiritual qi, as furious roars continued to surge from behind him. The emotions within the roar seemed to want to tear Zhuowen into pieces. Kid, hurry up and leave. The weapon spirit is very angry now, and is already increasing its speed. If you don't leave now, it will really catch up to you. Xiaohei's face suddenly changed as she spoke. Hearing this, Zhuowen looked at the spirit qi that was still gushing out from under his feet with some pity. The spirit qi at the bottom of the steps was extremely abundant. However, with the weapon spirit chasing after him, Zhuowen really didn't dare to stay here any longer. What a pity for the remaining spirit qi. With a light sigh, Zhuowen stomped his feet, and his speed increased by a large margin. With the replenishment of the spirit qi, Zhuowen's mental energy was almost undamaged and reached its peak state. Therefore, he could still barely maintain his speed. By the time Zhuowen set off, Lve Tao had already reached the 9,700th step. At this moment, Lve Tao's eyes were scarlet red, and his pupils were bloodshot. There was even a trace of blood flowing out from the corner of his mouth. 9,700th step. I really didn't expect the pressure here to have reached such a terrifying level. I wonder where Zhuowen is. Barely suppressing the boiling blood in his body, Lve Tao once again placed his gaze on the identity token. This was the first time he cared so much about an opponent. The moment Zhuowen caught up, he knew that he had no choice but to pay attention to Zhuowen. This was the first time in history that he felt threatened by a young genius. Still at the 9,500th step? Looks like he can't hold on anymore. After all, the pressure here can't be compared to the other steps. When Lve Tao discovered that the light spot representing Zhuowen in the identity token was still at the 9,500th step, a relaxed smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. This was the joy of defeating a strong opponent. However, the smile on Lve Tao's face didn't last for long, because he discovered that the light spot representing Zhuowen on the 9,500th step suddenly moved. Moreover, its speed was so fast that it was unbelievable. 9,510 steps, 9,520 steps, 9,530 steps, 9,540 steps, 9,550 steps. In 10 breaths of time, Zhuowen had consecutively crossed 50 steps, from the 9,500th step to the 9,550 step. Moreover, this speed was still slowly increasing, and the distance between them was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. How is this possible? How could Zhuowen's speed be so fast? No, I can't let him surpass me. Lve Tao roared loudly. His eyes were crimson red as he suddenly stomped on the 9,701st step. He couldn't let Zhuowen surpass him. He was the #1 genius of the younger generation in Wuxia County, and his pride wouldn't allow him to fail. Boom! Boom! Unfortunately, the pressure of the 9,700th step had already reached an extremely terrifying level. The instant Lve Tao's foot stepped on it, the pressure formed a violent cyclone that suddenly acted on Lve Tao's entire body. Puffed! Lve Tao's face flushed red, and a mouthful of cherry-red blood immediately spurted out. Lve Tao's body was on the verge of collapse, as if it would collapse at any moment. I refuse to accept this. Zhuowen, first place is mine. Lve Tao's, not yours. Lve Tao's eyes were filled with dense madness as he roared towards the sky. He clapped his hands together and suddenly slammed them on his chest. Instantly, the white robe on his body shattered into powder under the powerful force, revealing his robust body. On Lve Tao's chest, countless blood-red meridians gathered at the center of his chest, drawing a blood-red pattern in the center. It was a huge beast's claw, a blood-red beast's claw, and the smell of blood constantly spread out. This claw was a totem. It wasn't bright red in color, but a strange dark red. At this moment, Lve Tao didn't hesitate to slam his palm on the totem on his chest. The blood horn immediately emitted a dense blood-red light, as if it had melted and merged with Lve Tao's body. Lve Tao's eyes became a strange dark red, and a terrifying aura burst out from his body. It was as if there was a primordial beast hidden in Lve Tao's body that was gradually awakening. Boom! 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 Lve Tao seemed to have obtained new strength. He roared towards the sky and took a step forward, his speed almost reaching the limit. 9,750 steps. 9,800 steps. 9,850 steps. 9,900 steps. 9,950 steps. 9,950 steps. 9,950 steps. When LVE Tao reached 9,950 steps, the blood claw totem on his chest gradually dimmed and finally became transparent. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to notice this blood claw. Obviously, this bloodhorn totem was another force that was forcibly sealed in LVE Tao's body. It was probably LVE Tao's trump card. However, LVE Tao was fighting with his life on the line, so he forcefully undid the bloodhorn seal and obtained additional strength. Pucci, Zhuan, you can be proud that you forced me to use the blood essence that LV Hantian obtained from the blood demon's inheritance. This blood essence is my life-saving method. If it wasn't for the fact that my life was at stake, I would never use it. However, today I used it for you. Even if you lose to me, you will have no regrets. At this moment, his expression was extremely dim. Forcefully using the power of the bloodhorn totem caused the strength in his body to be severely insufficient. He knew that with his current condition, it was likely that he wouldn't be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Slightly panting, LVE Tao lowered his head to look at the identity token in his hand. This glance immediately caused LVE Tao's eyes to widen, and his face was filled with disbelief. This is impossible. How can this be? He saw that the light spot that represented Zhuan on the token had actually soared along with him. Moreover, its speed was slightly faster than before. 9,700 steps. 9,800 steps. 9,850 steps. 9,900 steps. 9,930 steps. Under LVE Tao's dumbfounded gaze, Zhuowen's level soared straight up to 9,930. At this moment, he was only 20 levels away from LVE Tao, and in the identity token, the light dots that represented the two of them were almost touching at this moment. This is impossible. LVE Tao's eyes were filled with shock and disbelief as he continuously muttered. LVE Tao's gaze contained a trace of madness and viciousness. LVE Tao once again raised his hand and fiercely slapped the blood claw totem on his chest. A mouthful of fresh blood violently spurted out, and a terrifying blood mist erupted from LVE Tao's body. In an instant, a sea of blood surged around LVE Tao. Blood light filled the air, and a terrifying pungent smell of blood spread across the entire stage. Zhuan, the first place belongs to me, LVE Tao, and not you, Zhuan. If you want to snatch the first place, then show me some real ability. Chapter 523. The last light spot in Zhongling Mountain. The battle between Zhuan and LVE Tao had reached its climax. Regardless of whether it was Zhuan or LVE Tao, both of them had given their all in order to fight for the first place in Zhongling Mountain, as well as the right to ascend to the summit. They all knew that only the first place had the right to ascend to the summit of Zhongling Mountain. At this moment, regardless of whether it was the leaders of the various forces on the platform, or the countless genius warriors in the square, all of them were silent. They held their breaths as their gazes were fixed on the light spots that were almost stuck together. Although most of them did not know what was going on between Zhuan and LVE Tao in Zhongling Mountain, they knew that the battle between Zhuan and LVE Tao had reached its climax. They all knew that the winner of the first place would be known very soon, especially when they saw that the light spots that represented Zhuan and LVE Tao were chasing after each other and approaching each other. Everyone's emotions reached a high point. A fierce battle between dragons and tigers. This is a true fierce battle between dragons and tigers. LVE Tao went from the 9,700th step to the 9,950th step. His speed soared to the extreme at that moment. It could be said that he was so fast that it was dazzling. However, that Zhuan is not bad either. He actually closed in step by step, and did not give in at all. That's right. LVE Tao obviously used some kind of secret technique at the end. That's why his speed became so fast. However, even though his speed was so fast, not only did Zhuan not pull away from him, but he is now only 20 steps away from Lve Tao. It's really terrifying. Between them, who will be the first? Sounds of discussion, uproar, and exclamations swept across the entire platform and square like a frenzied storm. Everyone was excited and expectant. They were all looking forward to who would be the first place in the end. On the platform, countless leaders could no longer sit still. They all stood up and stared at the Golden Tower. Zhuowen's miraculous performance had finally moved and shocked all the leaders. At this moment, everyone had forgotten that Zhuowen was only from a low-level city. They only knew that Zhuowen already had the qualifications to compete with Lve Tao for first place. Moreover, the possibility of this was extremely high. Is this Zhuowen really just a warrior from a low-level city? What an incredible kid! To be able to force Lve Tao, the #1 genius of Muqing County, into such a state, Zhuowen's name will shake the entire Muqing County even if he loses. Furthermore, if this Zhuowen is truly able to surpass Lve Tao's ranking on Zhongling Mountain, his name will definitely shake the entire Muqing County. At the front of the platform, the 5 leaders, who had extraordinary status and strength, were also shocked. Among them, Lu Nanshan's expression was the most interesting. At this moment, Lu Nanshan's face was filled with undisguised shock. He was really shocked by Zhuowen's performance. As the leader of the House of Marquis Qin, he was very clear about how unfathomable Lve Tao's strength was. However, Zhuowen was actually able to force Lve Tao into such a state, and even had the potential to surpass Lve Tao at any time. This Zhuowen must definitely be recruited. The potential of such a genius is not inferior to Lve Tao. If this kid is properly trained, he will be another Lve Tao. In the Battle of the 9 Counties half a year later, he will also shine brilliantly. After the shock, Lu Nanshan's heart revealed a trace of pleasant surprise. As the leader of Muqing County in name, Lu Nantian placed the overall situation above all else. His breadth of mind was not something that an ordinary person could compare with. Even if Zhuowen were to defeat Lve Tao and obtain the first place today, Lu Nantian would not make things difficult for Zhuowen. Instead, he would recruit him into the House of Marquis Qin and properly train him. This kind of genius was exactly what their Muqing County lacked. At this moment, within Zhongling Mountain, clouds were lingering and the mountain was trembling. Terrifying beastly roars continuously sounded throughout the entire Zhongling Mountain. On the 9,930th step, Zhuowen's entire body was trembling. His body that was covered with golden veins gradually began to crack. Streams of golden blood flowed through his body and landed on the steps below his feet. The pressure here was extremely terrifying. It was as if thousands of mountains were pressing down on his body. The extreme pain almost made Zhuowen have the urge to roar towards the sky. However, Zhuowen did not. At this moment, his expression was extremely calm, so calm that it was somewhat terrifying. Although the pain of the terrifying pressure pressing down on his body spread throughout his body, Zhuowen did not groan in pain. What's the point of pain? What's this little bit of pain? I've suffered much more than this. Could it be that I'm afraid of you? Boom! With a low roar, Zhuowen's feet suddenly stepped out and methodically climbed towards the top of the mountain. He knew that he was already very close to Lve Tao. He was also extremely close to the top of the mountain. He would not fall down at this moment, nor did he want to fall down. At this moment, Lve Tao's hair was disheveled. His expression was malevolent and painful. That crazy and blazing gaze filled Lve Tao with a terrifying aura. Every 10 steps, Lve Tao would subconsciously look at the identity badge in his palm. Then, he would punch the increasingly dim blood claw totem on his chest, barely supporting him as he continued to move forward. 9,960 steps, 9,970 steps, 9,980 steps, 9,990 steps. When Lve Tao reached the 9,990th step, the pressure here had already reached an extremely terrifying level. Even Lve Tao couldn't help but kneel on one knee under the pressure of the 9,990th step. Countless wounds appeared on his body as a bloody mist exploded. There are still 10 steps left. As long as I cross the 10th step, I will be able to reach the top of the mountain. And I will be the undisputed number one. Lve Tao suddenly roared. His eyes were filled with madness. His hands formed into fists and fiercely smashed onto his chest. The powerful force caused him to involuntarily spit out a large mouthful of blood. At this moment, the extremely dim blood claw totem on his chest suddenly dissipated. The instant the totem dissipated, waves of terrifying energy finally filled Lve Tao's body. This was the last bit of energy from the blood demon's blood essence. At this moment, Lve Tao was clearly prepared to go all out. Tap tap tap. Heavy footsteps slowly sounded on the steps. Lve Tao was walking very slowly, like an old cow pulling a cart. With heavy steps, he walked step by step towards the final peak of the mountain. 9,991 stair. 9,993 stair. 9,995 stair. 9,997 stair. 9,999 stair Pucci. In the end, Lve Tao's feet stopped at the 9,999 steps. He spat out another mouthful of blood, and his expression became much gloomier. At this moment, he knew that he had reached his limit. The last step, the 10,000th step, let's cross it. I want to reach the peak of the mountain. A beast-like roar was emitted from his throat. Lve Tao's expression was crazed as he stepped onto the 10,000th step without a care. Immediately, the entire Zhongling mountain trembled, and the sky changed color. Boom boom boom. The invisible pressure on the 10,000th step seemed to have substance, as it gathered into an invisible mountain that enveloped Lve Tao. Pucci. Under this pressure, Lve Tao was sent flying without any ability to resist. However, the instant he was sent flying, Lve Tao's gaze focused on the peak of the mountain within the hazy clouds. At this moment, he seemed to be able to see the stone statue that stood on the peak of the mountain again. The huge and majestic stone statue seemed to be slowly lowering its head at this moment, silently gazing at Lve Tao, who was already flying away. What exactly is on the peak of the mountain? What exactly is there? Back then, Lve Hantian had never seen it. Today I have also never seen it. A soft sigh slowly sounded out. Lve Tao took out his identity token and gently rubbed it. Instantly, it turned into a pillar of light and disappeared from Zhongling Mountain. He knew that he was unable to reach the peak of the mountain. At this moment, only Zhuowen was left on the entire mountain. The entire Zhongling Mountain seemed to have suddenly become deathly silent the moment Lve Tao left. The square and platform outside Zhongling Mountain also became incomparably silent. When Lve Tao, who was covered in blood, finally appeared on the square, all the genius practitioners on the square had their mouths slightly agape. The atmosphere had become exceptionally strange and silent. No one had expected that Lve Tao would leave Zhongling Mountain before Zhuowen. At this moment, in the huge golden tower, almost everyone's name had become dim. The only light that was still shining was second Zhuowen, 9,950th step. Everyone was looking forward to the only figure left on Zhongling Mountain. Would this young man named Zhuowen's final result surpass Lve Tao's record and forcefully reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain? At this moment, Lve Tao's expression was gloomy, and his brows were filled with exhaustion. The moment he appeared on the square, the other genius practitioners that belonged to the house of Marquis Qin in the square came to Lve Tao's side and helped him to a quieter corner to recuperate from his injuries. Under the support of a few people, Lve Tao's expression was still indifferent. However, his slightly trembling hands revealed the emotions in his heart at this moment. In the square, all the practitioners consciously opened up a path for Lve Tao to walk through. Everyone stared at the young man in front of them in awe. They knew that this was a peerless genius who had almost reached the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Such a genius and expert would naturally receive everyone's respect and awe. Slowly sitting in the corner, Lve Tao did not say a word from beginning to end. When he sat down, he immediately took out his identity token. His gaze was fixed on the light that was in second place, and his expression was filled with a complicated expression. He really did not expect that the young man, who he had not placed in his eyes back then, would actually be able to force him to such an extent in Zhongling Mountain. He had even forced him to use almost all of his trump cards. Zhuowen, First place will definitely be mine, unless you reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Chapter 524. 9999 steps. At this moment, regardless of whether it was the platform or the plaza, everyone seemed to have a tacit understanding as they sunk into silence. Heavy and excited breathing sounds gradually spread out from the crowd, as their gazes were tightly fixed on the huge golden tower. This was because the 1,000-story golden tower had almost completely dimmed. Only the second story at the top still had a spot of light that was as dazzling as a small sun. Second place, Zhuo, 9,950 steps. He was only 49 steps away from first place, Lve Tao. Everyone was anticipating whether Zhuo would be able to continue climbing and surpass Lve Tao's record, break Zhongling Mountain's record, and reach the peak of the unparalleled mountain. At a corner of the plaza, Lve Tao was seated with his legs crossed. However, his face was no longer as indifferent as before. Instead, it was intertwined with a complicated and nervous expression, as his gaze was tightly fixed on the identity token. He wanted to personally see exactly what level Zhuo could reach. The expressions of the four super geniuses, Luo Xing, Zhu Qi, Su Tianliang and Qin Batian, changed at this moment. The four of them blankly stared at Lve Tao, who had a complicated expression on his face, before glancing at the identity token, at the spot of light that represented Zhuo. Instantly, their hearts churned endlessly like stormy waves. Lve Tao actually came out first? How can that Zhuo be so strong? Qin Batian opened his mouth as he suddenly bitterly asked. Although Qin Batian admitted that Zhuo's potential was extremely strong, and his strength was not bad, from his point of view, he should be far from the number one genius of Muqing County, Lve Tao. However, from the looks of it, the potential that Zhuo had displayed was not the slightest bit weaker than Lve Tao. In fact, to a certain extent, he was even stronger than Lve Tao. Perhaps, this Zhuo might be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain and break the record of Zhongling Mountain that has existed for thousands of years. Luo Xing's beautiful eyes faintly flashed as she spoke with a complicated expression. Everything that Zhuo had shown had far exceeded her imagination. This child's potential was far stronger than hers. Even Lve Tao was slightly inferior. Su Tianliang's face was gloomy to the extreme. He said coldly, "To be able to hold on until now, this Zhuo's potential is indeed not bad. However, to surpass Brother Liu's record and reach the peak of the mountain, that is simply a fool's dream." Yes, in the past thousands of years, no one has truly climbed to the summit of Zhongling Mountain. Even the brilliant Lu Hantian from the previous competition, and the even more stunning Lui Tao from this competition, these two exceptional geniuses have never climbed to the summit. It is unlikely that this Zhuo will be able to reach the summit. Zhu Qi, who was dressed in blood-red clothes, and whose eyes occasionally flashed with a blood-red glow, also stepped forward, his expression cold and indifferent. "Didn't you think that Zhuo wouldn't be able to catch up with Lve Tao? But now, not only has Zhuo caught up, but he has also forced Lve Tao to leave Zhongling Mountain in advance. Now that you are so sure that Zhuo won't be able to reach the summit, don't shoot yourself in the foot when the time comes." Seeing that Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi were united against a common enemy, a trace of disgust flashed across Luo Xing's beautiful eyes. She waved her hand and said impatiently, she had a hunch that Zhuo might really be able to reach the summit and break the record that had not been broken for thousands of years. Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi's faces suddenly turned ugly when they heard this. However, they did not argue with Luo Xing too much. After all, there was an ancient restriction in this square. They did not dare to make a move. Moreover, even if they made a move, they might not be a match for Luo Xing. Luo Xing was the second genius of Muqing County after all. Her strength was also unfathomable. Even if they joined forces, they might not be able to gain the slightest advantage against her. Brother Zhu, this Zhuo must have a great secret on him. With his weak strength, he was actually able to catch up to Lve Tao in Zhongling Mountain. It seems that this secret must be extremely precious. When we reach the 4th level, we must join forces to kill him. Su Tianliang's eyes flickered as he suddenly sent a sound transmission to Zhu Qi beside him. Zhuowen's terrifying performance had already caused the killing intent in Su Tianliang's heart to surge to the extreme. If this child was not eliminated, there would be no end of trouble in the future. Zhu Qi's eyes flickered as he nodded slightly. He was also very curious about what kind of secret Zhuowen had that could allow him, a second-wheel ultimate emperor stage expert, to advance triumphantly in Zhongling Mountain and force LV Tao to such an extent. Zhu Qi and Su Tianliang naturally did not believe that Zhuowen's performance in Zhongling Mountain was based on his own strength. This was because before they entered Zhongling Mountain, Zhuowen's strength was only at the peak of the second-wheel ultimate emperor stage. With such strength, how could he continuously break through and increase his strength in such a harsh environment as Zhongling Mountain? This was simply impossible, unless there was external help. Zhuowen silently stood on the 9,950th step. His gaze focused on the identity token in his hand. Especially when he saw the light that at the first place dim, Zhuowen could not help but reveal a trace of surprise on his face. He did not expect that LVE Tao, who was only a step away from the 10,000th step, would not take another step. Instead, he chose to leave Zhongling Mountain. Is the last step of Zhongling Mountain really that terrifying? Zhuowen softly muttered as he raised his head slightly. His sharp gaze pierced through the layers of fog and shot towards the peak of the mountain. At this moment, at such a close distance, Zhuowen finally saw the hazy scenery on the peak of the mountain. Within the hazy clouds, there seemed to be a tall and solemn stone statue. The huge stone statue quietly stood on the peak of the mountain, as if it was holding up the entire sky. On the peak of the mountain, what is there? Even LVE Tao is so desperate and yearning for it. What is there on the peak of the mountain? Dang dang dang. As he spoke, Zhuowen suddenly stepped out and slowly walked towards the last 50th step at a moderate speed. He wanted to see if he had the qualifications to reach the peak of the mountain. He wanted to see what was there on the peak of the mountain, and what was it that kept attracting everyone to climb towards the peak of the mountain. The moment Zhuowen stepped out, all the warriors in the square were in an uproar because they discovered that Zhuowen, who had stayed on the 9,950th step for a long time, finally moved at this moment. Look, Zhuowen has finally moved. He is moving towards the last 50th step. I wonder what level he can reach. This Zhuowen is indeed amazing. Although his speed is much slower now, compared to LVE Tao, there is not much difference. I wonder if he can surpass LVE Tao's height. Countless gazes converged on the light that represented Zhuowen. Everyone's breathing became rapid and heavy. It was as if every step Zhuowen took was stepping on their hearts. It was incomparably shocking. Dang dang dang. 9,960th step. 9,970th step. 9,980th step. 9,990th step. Boom. The moment his foot stepped on the 9,990th step, the pressure on the entire step almost produced a qualitative leap. Zhuowen's body even trembled. He let out a muffled groan as a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. What a terrifying pressure. I really can't imagine how LVE Tao managed to persevere until the 9,999th step. Zhuowen did not retreat. Instead, his gaze was extremely firm. After feeling the powerful pressure here, he also felt LVE Tao's strength more and more. After all, LVE Tao wasn't like Zhuowen, who relied on the replenishment of spirit energy and the improvement of his strength. LVE Tao had completely relied on his own strength and foundation to finally reach the 9,999th step. Even Zhuowen admired such a magnificent feat. 9,991 steps. Cross it for me. Resisting the pressure around him that was like the pressure of the deep sea, Zhuowen let out a low roar. His foot suddenly stomped on the 9,991st step. Suddenly, countless pressure turned into a whirlwind that blasted on Zhuowen's body. However, Zhuowen did not care. He directly stepped on the step like a madman. Poochie! A mouthful of blood was immediately spat out from his mouth. At this moment, Zhuowen's complexion became incomparably pale. Gritting his teeth, Zhuowen once again stepped forward, his speed as slow as an old ox pulling a cart. When Zhuowen stepped on the 9,990th step, the entire square was in an uproar. Uproars and exclamations were like a symphony, exploding across the sky and spreading to every corner of the square. Look, Zhuowen has reached the 9,990th step, and he's still slowly climbing. Perhaps he really can reach LVE Tao's height, or even surpass him. This Zhuowen is really too heaven-defying. I'm afraid that he's the only genius who can force LVE Tao to such an extent in this Origin Chi Tower battle. Swoosh. Sitting cross-legged in the square, LVE Tao's face could no longer remain calm. His eyes were tightly fixed on Zhuowen's light spot. Especially after seeing that Zhuowen had indeed reached the 9,990th step, his heart became incomparably nervous. Moreover, what made his breathing even more hurried was that Zhuowen's light spot was still ascending. Although the speed was very slow, there were indeed no signs of it stopping. 9,991st step, 9,993rd step, 9,995th step, 9,997th step. When Zhuowen's light spot reached the 9,997th step, LVE Tao was finally unable to suppress the anxiety in his heart. He abruptly stood up, his gaze constantly fixed on Zhuowen's light spot. At this moment, the square had become incomparably silent. Everyone blankly stared at the light spot that had already reached the 9,997th step. They knew that the difference between Zhuowen and LVE Tao was only 2 steps. On Zhongling Mountain, countless pressure accompanied the rolling clouds. At this moment, Zhuowen's hair was disheveled, sweat pouring down like rain. His face was pale, and his body that was covered in golden veins seemed to show signs of collapsing. 9,998th step, cross it for me. His eyes scarlet red, Zhuowen roared towards the sky. The unyielding feeling in his heart wantonly drifted out with this roar. With a boom, Zhuowen endured the pressure and directly stepped onto the 9,998th step. Only 1 step away from LVE Tao. 9,999th step, cross it for me. Chapter 525. First place, at the peak of the mountain. Boom. 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 Tremors that seemed like the heavens were falling, and the earth suddenly erupted from the entire Zhongling Mountain. It was as if the inside of Zhongling Mountain had collapsed at this moment. Countless beastly roars seemed to converge at this moment, forming a ring-shaped intense sound wave that spread out. The instant Zhuowen's foot stepped onto the 999th step, the surrounding pressure seemed to form countless spiral-shaped cyclones at this moment. With a sharp whistle, they condensed on Zhuowen's body. Puchi! The intense pressure caused Zhuowen to involuntarily vomit a mouthful of blood. His face was as pale as snow, the veins on his forehead bulged, and cold sweat trickled down. Under this pressure, the foot that he had taken a step forward stagnated in midair, and was on the verge of collapse. Step over. 365 acupoints, open all of them for me. With a low roar, Zhuowen's entire body was bathed in blood. Then, the foot that had stagnated in midair was like a falling meteor. In the end, it landed on the 999th step. Then, the entire Zhongling Mountain began to rumble. The instant Zhuowen reached the 999th step, the hearts of all the genius warriors in the plaza seemed to fiercely clench at this moment, and then violently beat for a moment. At this moment, the entire plaza became incomparably silent. Everyone stared straight at the light spot that represented Zhuowen. In the end, it overlapped with LVE Tao's light spot, which had already dimmed. They knew that Zhuowen had reached the 999th step. At this moment, his ranking was already tied with LVE Tao, tied for first place. Swoosh! Swoosh! At this moment, regardless of whether it was the warriors in the plaza or the masters on the platform, they all stood up at this moment. Their gazes were tightly fixed on the light spot that was like a star in the vast starry sky. He reached it. Zhuowen has reached the 999th step, tied with LVE Tao for first place. Oh my god! This Zhuowen has actually caught up to LVE Tao, and is even tied with him. What kind of freak is this? I wonder if this Zhuowen will be able to take the final step and reach the summit of the Zhongling Mountain. Uproars, exclamations, and clamors were like endless firecrackers exploding in the entire square. Everyone's emotions were boiling the moment Zhuowen stepped onto the 9,999th step. Everyone's eyes were burning as they stared at the spot of light that was still shining brightly. They hoped, longed, and looked forward to whether this spot of light would be able to surpass Lve Tao and reach the peak of the mountain. Creak. At this moment, Lve Tao's pupils had almost shrunk to the size of a needle. His somewhat powerful hand tightly held the identity token. Looking at the light spot in the token that was at the same level as him, his expression suddenly changed. Zhuowen, Zhuowen, Lve Tao muttered in a low voice. His eyes were filled with a complicated and crazy look. The pride he had always had in his heart, at this moment, was washed away the moment Zhuowen reached the 9,999th step. How is this possible? This Zhuowen is at the same level as Lve Tao. He actually reached the 9,999th step? Su Tianliang exclaimed. His eyes were filled with disbelief as he stared at the light spot on the identity token. Zhuowen's expression wasn't good either. He didn't expect that this Zhuowen would be so tenacious. He was actually able to persist for so long in the Zhongling mountain, and finally reach the same height as Lve Tao. As for Qin Batian and Luo Xing, their eyes were filled with intense shock. At this moment, Zhuowen had undoubtedly become much more dazzling and blazing in their eyes. So what if this Zhuowen reached the 9,999th step? In the entire Zhongling mountain, other than the peak, there's nothing good. Without reaching the peak, no matter how high you climb, it's useless. I'm afraid that in a while, this kid will directly withdraw from the Zhongling mountain. Su Tianliang's expression was extremely gloomy. His gaze coldly focused on the light spot that represented Zhuowen on the identity token. He knew that not long after Lve Tao reached the 9,999th step, he directly withdrew from the Zhongling mountain. Obviously, the pressure of the 10,000th step of the Zhongling mountain was terrifying. Even a peerless genius like Lve Tao couldn't resist it. He didn't think that Zhuowen was more powerful than Lve Tao. After all, the fact that the former was able to be at the same rank as Lve Tao was already extremely shocking. Time passed by minute. Everyone in the square stared at Zhuowen's light spot. They all wanted to see if this Zhuowen could surpass Lve Tao and reach the peak of the mountain. As time passed, everyone discovered that the light spot that represented Zhuowen was gradually dimming. They weren't unfamiliar with this sign. It was a sign that the owner of the light spot couldn't hold on any longer. Once the light spot showed signs of dimming, it meant that the owner of the light spot had reached his limit. It also meant that this person would soon withdraw from the Zhongling mountain. Zhuowen's light spot is gradually dimming. Could it be that he can only reach the 9,999th step? Sigh. The peak of the Zhongling mountain is too terrifying. Even the two peerless geniuses, Lve Hantian and Lve Tao, were unable to cross the 10,000th step. Even Zhuowen, who has repeatedly created miracles, will probably return in failure. Zhuowen's light spot became dimmer and dimmer. Many people in the square revealed a trace of disappointment. Originally, they were looking forward to Zhuowen breaking the record of the Zhongling mountain and reaching the peak of the mountain. Now it seemed that this wishful thinking was unlikely to be realized. When the originally nervous Lve Tao discovered that Zhuowen's light spot was gradually dimming, he couldn't help but gently sigh in his heart. He was truly worried. If Zhuowen really reached the peak of the mountain, he didn't know what kind of emotions he would have in his heart. After a moment of silence, Lve Tao suddenly whispered to himself, "Zhuowen, in this year's Yuanqi Tower battle, perhaps only you are my opponent, and have the qualifications to compete with me for first place." The moment Lve Tao gradually put away the command token, he suddenly caught a glimpse of the dimming dot of light from the corner of his eye. Suddenly, the dot of light once again glowed with a blazing light. At this moment, that light seemed so dazzling. On the 9,999th step, the golden veins in Zhuowen's body seemed to have ruptured. Countless amounts of blood suffused with a golden glow continuously flowed out from his body, causing Zhuowen to be filled with a tragic beauty. The 10,000th step. At the peak of the mountain, step over it for me. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with madness. Terrifying blood vessels filled the area around his eyes. His face was sinister, his expression was mournful, and his entire body was battered and exhausted. However, Zhuowen's face was filled with an unyielding expression, filled with unwillingness, and filled with no fear. In fact, Zhuowen could already clearly see the huge stone statue, standing at the peak of the mountain behind the hazy fog. The stone statue seemed to be silently looking down at Zhuowen at this moment, seemingly mocking and pitying him. Boom, boom, boom. However, Zhuowen's foot that had been lifted into the air ultimately came to a halt. No matter how much Zhuowen struggled, no matter how unwilling he was unable to land on the 10,000th step that seemed to be within reach. Puchi, like a raging wave, the pressure sealed Zhuowen's surroundings from all directions and bombarded Zhuowen's body. Suddenly, Zhuowen felt as if his body was attached to a huge mountain. Then his chest felt numb, and he was directly sent flying by the powerful pressure. Zhuowen felt his mind go blank as he hovered in the air. His eyes were fixed on the stone statue on the mountain peak. The stone statue had been looking at him all this time. It seemed to be mocking him, but it also seemed to be pitying him. It was as if it had some kind of magical power. Living in this world is like living in thorns. If the heart is not moved, one will not act rashly. If one does not move, one will not be hurt. If one is moved, one will act rashly. One will hurt one's body and bones, thus experiencing all the pain in the world. The moment Zhuowen was sent flying, the golden torrent in Zhuowen's sea of consciousness suddenly transmitted a solemn voice. Immediately, it filled Zhuowen's ears and mind. Slowly, Zhuowen closed his eyes. At this moment, he was no longer looking at the statue at the peak of the mountain. Instead, he was immersed in the solemn voice. At this moment, he thought of the boundless sea, the towering mountains that reached into the clouds, the vast wilderness, and the blue sky with rolling clouds. The moment Zhuowen suddenly opened his eyes, they were unknowingly filled with dense golden light. If the heart is not moved, one will not act rashly. If one is not moved, one will not be hurt. If one is moved, one will act rashly. One will hurt one's body and bones, thus experiencing all the pain in the world. If the heart is not moved, then there will be no thoughts, and see through everything. Everything is nothing, right? At this moment, Zhuowen seemed to have understood something. When his eyes that were filled with golden light once again looked at the peak of the mountain, the stone statue that stood there did not exist. Or rather, it did not exist at all. Zhuowen was standing on the 9,999th step. He stood tall, his black robes fluttering in the absence of wind. So that's how it is. The 10,000th step of Zhongling Mountain does not have any pressure at all. Instead, it is a realistic illusion. The moment I stepped onto the 10,000th step, I had already fallen into that strange but realistic illusion. If I am unable to completely break through it, then I will never be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Stomp. With that, Zhuowen stomped his foot and directly stepped onto the 10,000th step of Zhongling Mountain. Then the entire mountain shook violently, crack. When Lve Tao caught a glimpse of the originally dim light spot from the corner of his eye, it actually glowed again at this moment. When it lit up like a candle, Lve Tao was completely stunned on the spot. His face was filled with disbelief. Moreover, Zhuowen's light spot suddenly became dazzling at this moment. It was like a slowly rising sun. It became more and more dazzling and finally became dazzling. Then the light spot that had been stagnant suddenly moved slightly. It crossed the 9,999th step, and finally reached the 10,000th step that no one had ever stepped onto before. Crack! Chapter 526. Everyone was in an uproar. When this message finally appeared on everyone's identity medallion and golden pagoda, no matter if it was the genius cultivators on the square, or the leaders of the various forces on the platform, they all fell into a dead silence at this moment. After a period of absolute silence, the entire square was filled with an uproar. The sound was getting louder and louder, as if the sky was collapsing and the sea was collapsing, suddenly engulfing the crowd. On the summit. Zhuowen has reached the summit. He has obtained the first place of Zhongling Mountain. Isn't this too unbelievable? This Zhuowen has actually crossed the 10,000th step, surpassing Lve Tao, and obtaining the first place. Not only that, this Zhuowen is the first cultivator in history to reach the summit of Zhongling Mountain. This person has broken the record of Zhongling Mountain that has existed for thousands of years. Everyone went crazy, excited, roaring, and even self-mutilating themselves to calm the emotions in their hearts. They never thought that Zhuowen would be able to reach the summit of Zhongling Mountain in the end, breaking the record that no one had ever set before. From now on, Zhuowen's name would truly shake Muqing County. His reputation might even surpass the original #1 genius of Muqing County, Lve Tao. Lve Tao stared blankly at the identity medallion that had already turned into fragments in his hand, as well as the dazzling light within the fragments. His expression was filled with a complicated expression. This was the first time he had tasted the feeling of defeat. This feeling was so uncomfortable that it made him feel suffocated. Zhuowen, I really never thought that you would be able to surpass me. However, defeating me in Zhongling Mountain doesn't necessarily mean that your strength is stronger than mine. It can only mean that your potential is higher than mine. I, Lve Tao, am not that easy to surpass. When the time comes, I will still compete with you. Suddenly, a smile appeared on Lve Tao's face. Within that smile, there was even a hint of battle intent hidden. This was the excitement and joy of finding an opponent that appreciated each other. Lve Tao knew that ever since he was young, his path had been too smooth. He was #1 in everything. No matter who saw him, they would look at him with reverence and avoid him from afar. That was why he had developed such a proud and aloof personality. But now Zhuowen's stunning performance gave Lve Tao a wake-up call. He finally knew that there was always someone better than him. He was too conceited and arrogant in the past. If Lu Nantian was here to see Lve Tao's change, he would definitely be very gratified. This was because Lve Tao had finally opened up after this failure. In other words, Lve Tao had recognized himself, and his mentality had also changed. Perhaps after this battle, Lve Tao would make another breakthrough. Speaking of which, Lve Nantian might have to thank Zhuowen for suppressing Lve Tao in Zhongling Mountain. Hiss! Su Tianliang sucked in a breath of cold air. He even rubbed his eyes with his hand. When he stared at the identity token again, he was stunned on the spot. He did not expect that Zhuowen would actually surpass Lve Tao and finally reach the peak of the mountain. Zhuowen, this hateful little bastard, actually reached the peak of Zhongling Mountain. How did this bastard do it? At this moment, Su Tianliang's eyes were filled with bewilderment. Zhuowen's stunning performance had completely stunned him. How much potential and strength did one need to be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain? Suddenly crushing the identity token in his hand, Su Tianliang's eyes were filled with killing intent. He thought to himself, I really did not expect this kid to reach this level. But when we reach the 4th floor, I want him to spit out all the benefits he obtained in Zhongling Mountain. I will also take that little bastard's life while I'm at it. Not far away, Zhu Qi, Qin Batian, and Luo Xing all had their mouths slightly open. The shock in their eyes was no less than Su Tianliang's. This Zhuowen is really going to soar into the sky. This guy is the biggest dark horse I have ever seen. Qin Batian smacked his lips and said with a bitter smile, all of us have underestimated this Zhuowen. This child's potential far surpasses ours. Being able to ascend to the peak of Zhongling Mountain can be considered to be well-deserved. Luo Xing sighed softly. Her beautiful eyes were filled with a complicated expression. She still remembered that when Qing Lian first mentioned Zhuowen's name in Jade Lady Star Court, she didn't care at all. She didn't even put Zhuowen in her eyes. Later, when the battle for the Origin Qi Tower began, Zhuowen defeated the geniuses of the 4 high-grade cities on the 1st floor and seized control of the Ascension Island. At that time, she had just begun to pay attention to Zhuowen. However, she didn't put him in her eyes. After all, Zhuowen's performance was barely passable. Then, when the Heaven and Earth monolith Zhuowen forcefully charged into the Heaven stage area, she finally began to size up this youth, who didn't have an outstanding appearance. Later, when Zhuowen overcame all the difficulties in the training mountain, and even defeated LV Yongsheng. Zhuowen finally gained her attention. Because of this, she had even personally tried to recruit Zhuowen. However, what caused her to be surprised was that Zhuowen, who was clearly only an 18 or 19-year-old youth, had actually decisively rejected her invitation. The maturity and decisiveness he displayed ultimately caused her to have a higher opinion of him. However, the frustration of being rejected for the first time made Luo Xing unhappy and even a little angry. In the end, this kind of recruitment was left unsettled. Then it was the battle for the ranking of the Zhongling Mountain. Zhuowen really underwent a transformation in the Zhongling Mountain. Step by step, he surpassed countless geniuses from the lowest level. Even she, who was one of the 5 great geniuses, was surpassed by him. And now, Zhuowen had caught up with the number 1 genius of Muqing County, Lve Tao, and surpassed him. In the end, he reached the summit of the Zhongling Mountain. At this moment, Zhuowen's name had undoubtedly become much more dazzling. Now that she thought about it, Luo Xing suddenly realized that Zhuowen's experience could be described as a legend. This was a youth who constantly created miracles. Zhuowen he. What kind of person is he? Luo Xing's beautiful eyes quietly stared at the light that represented Zhuowen, and she once again asked such a question. Compared to the degree of excitement of the numerous geniuses in the square, on the platform at the summit of the 2nd level of the Vitality Tower, countless leaders had already involuntarily stood up at this moment. Even LV Nantian, the master of the meteorite, and the other 4 magnates had also stood up. Their hearts were like raging waves. Gulp. The sound of saliva being swallowed could be heard on the somewhat quiet platform. No one had expected that Zhuowen would actually surpass Lve Tao in the end, and become the number 1 of the Zhongling Mountain this time. Moreover, he had even reached the summit of the Zhongling Mountain. Zhuowen, he broke the record of the Zhongling Mountain that had existed for thousands of years, and also created an immortal legend. In the countless Vitality Tower battles, no genius has ever reached the summit of the Zhongling Mountain. Zhuowen, he has really reached the summit. At this moment, LV Nanshan's entire body suddenly trembled. His hands trembled as he stared straight at the dazzling light at the top of the Golden Tower. His eyes were filled with excitement and a complicated expression. He was excited because someone had finally broken the record of the Zhongling Mountain. What was complicated was that the person who broke the record was not Lve Tao, who he had high hopes for. And LV Nanshan's words were like a fuse that had been ignited. The entire silent platform was set off in an uproar like a huge wave. All of the leaders of the various factions had heated gazes as they discussed, chatted and discussed. The focal point of these discussions was undoubtedly Zhuowen. In fact, the gazes of many of the leaders of the various factions were currently gathered on Gu Yuetian, Qiu Chou and Ouyang Yuntu. They all knew that these 3 people were undoubtedly the 3 people who had the best relationship with Zhuowen, especially Gu Yutian, who was the city lord of Rotan Armor City. At this moment, Gu Yutian seemed to have become a delicious cake in everyone's eyes. Everyone gathered around Gu Yutian, and the sounds of discussion were even more overwhelming. Lord Gucheng, you must cooperate with our Golden Scale City. In any case, we are one of the top-ranked super cities. If you cooperate with us, we will agree to any conditions. What is your Golden Scale City? Our Black Rock City is one of the top 5 super cities. Our foundation is much deeper than yours. Lord Gucheng, if you cooperate with us, we will definitely give you a satisfactory price. Is your Black Rock City very amazing? Lord Gucheng, I am Ling Tian from Ling Tian City. If you cooperate with us, I, Ling Tian, am willing to give you a royal armor skill as a reward. What do you think? When this voice sounded out, the crowd gasped. Following this, a middle-aged man in white clothes smiled as he slowly walked towards Gu Yutian, his eyes filled with kindness. It's actually the city lord of the number 1 super city, Ling Tian City. Isn't this reward too generous? It's just a cooperation, yet he's willing to give us a royal armor skill. This Ling Tian is so generous. Ling Tian City is the super city closest to the top 5 super cities, and its foundation is much deeper than in ordinary super cities. It's not surprising that they would give us a royal armor skill. Since Ling Tian has acted, looks like we don't have a chance. Seeing Ling Tian slowly walk over, the other city lords inwardly cursed at their bad luck. They unwillingly stopped bothering Guyu Tian, and instead looked at Guyu Tian. At this moment, Guyu Tian's mind was already muddled by the immense joy. Even he didn't expect that Zhuowen would actually surpass Lve Tao and obtain first place, and even break the record to enter the peak of Zhongling Mountain. All of this, in his eyes, was like a dream, extremely unreal. With so many super cities looking at him with flattering smiles, even he felt a bit embarrassed. What's more, the city lord of Lingtian City had used a royal armor skill in exchange for a chance to cooperate with Rotan Armor City. This caused his mind to go blank, and he felt as if he could not think at all. Happiness had truly come too suddenly at this moment. So sudden that even Guyu Tian wasn't prepared for it. Zhuowen, oh Zhuowen, I never thought that you would bring such great fortune to our Rotan Armor City. After we return, your Zhuo family will have the same status as our city lord's residence, and will have the same authority as our city lord's residence. Chapter 527. 3 Heavenly Tribulations. The moment Zhuowen reached the peak of the huge Zhongling Mountain, the clouds that were originally lingering around it completely disappeared, revealing the bare mountain and the peak of the mountain that towered into the clouds. On the square, everyone could not help but raise their heads. Their gazes were focused on the peak of Zhongling Mountain. They seemed to have seen a proud figure standing on the peak of the mountain. They knew that the figure was the only one who had reached the peak, Zhuowen. Zhuowen stood tall on the peak as a furious gust of wind blew over, causing his clothes and hair to flutter. Standing on the peak and looking down on all the living beings below, this feeling of looking down on all the mountains is truly wonderful. Zhuowen lowered his head and faced the raging wind in front of him. His gaze looked down at everyone in the plaza below Zhongling Mountain from top to bottom. He saw the unwilling Su Tianliang, the shocked Qin Batian, the complicated Luo Xing, the cold and emotionless Yu Qi, as well as the calm Lve Tao, and the countless other geniuses in the square. The expressions on all their faces were magnified infinitely in Zhuowen's eyes, as if they were right before his eyes. At the same time, Zhuowen saw the entire third floor of the tower from afar. It was a vast and desolate wilderness. Thick smoke filled the wilderness. It was simply a wasteland. Zhuowen slowly extended his right hand and gently pinched the air. It was as if everything below was within his grasp at this moment. The feeling of being in control of fate made Zhuowen feel a sense of excitement in his heart. My fate is in my own hands, not the heavens. Zhuowen raised his head slightly and roared. At the same time, waves of aura surged out from his body. This aura had far surpassed the peak of the second wheel of the Ultimate Emperor Realm. It had even reached the third wheel of the Ultimate Emperor Realm. This aura, is this kid about to break through? In his sea of consciousness, Xiaohe also felt the aura that had suddenly surged out from Zhuowen's body. A trace of surprise appeared on his face. But speaking of which, it's about time for this kid to break through. After all, Zhuowen has been at the peak of the second wheel for quite some time. Coupled with the replenishment of the spiritual energy in Zhongling Mountain, his accumulation has become extremely deep. Now that he's reached the peak, it's only logical for him to break through. After pondering for a moment, Xiaohe was not too surprised. After all, Zhuowen had absorbed a lot of spiritual energy in Zhongling Mountain. Although most of the spiritual energy had been used to break through the apertures in his body, there would always be a portion of it that would flow into his meridians and dantian during the process of absorption. Although the amount of spiritual qi was small, it had accumulated over the course of many times. Thus, Zhuowen had naturally entered the ultimate three-wheel emperor realm. Boom, boom, boom. The moment Zhuowen's aura swelled to the peak of the third wheel, countless terrifying dark clouds that resembled black dragons gathered in the sky above Zhongling Mountain. Countless bolts of lightning as thick as buckets slithered between the dark clouds. It looked extremely ferocious and terrifying. The 3 heavenly tribulations had finally descended. As Zhuowen prepared to undergo the 3 heavenly tribulations, all the cultivators in the square below Zhongling Mountain noticed the dark clouds that were constantly gathering in the sky above Zhongling Mountain, as well as the monstrous lightning that constantly flashed between the dark clouds. Is that a heavenly tribulation? That Zhuowen actually made a breakthrough after reaching the summit? He should have broken through. Those dark clouds are indeed unique to heavenly tribulations. However, Zhuowen's heavenly tribulation doesn't seem to be very strong this time. It doesn't seem like 5 heavenly tribulations. Yes, this aura is indeed much weaker than 5 heavenly tribulations. It's even weaker than 4 heavenly tribulations. It seems like it's only 3 heavenly tribulations. The moment the heavenly tribulation appeared, everyone in the square was stunned. This was because they discovered that the heavenly tribulation that appeared at the peak of Zhongling Mountain was pitifully weak. It wasn't the 5 heavenly tribulations that they had imagined at all. Due to Zhuowen's heaven-defying performance on Zhongling Mountain, everyone believed that Zhuowen's strength had at least reached the peak of the 4th wheel. Therefore, from the moment the heavenly tribulation appeared, they subconsciously believed that Zhuowen was going to undergo 5 heavenly tribulations. However, after careful observation, they were shocked to discover that the heavenly tribulation Zhuowen was undergoing was extremely weak. It was only at the level of 3 heavenly tribulations. In other words, Zhuowen had always been a peak of the 2nd wheel of the Ultimate Emperor realm. He's actually only a peak of the 2nd wheel of the Ultimate Emperor realm? How did this Zhuowen survive until the end on Zhongling Mountain with such meager strength, and finally reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain? After confirming that the dark clouds at the peak of Zhongling Mountain were only 3 heavenly tribulations, all the cultivators in the square were stunned. They began to wonder how Zhuowen had reached the peak with such meager strength. Lve Tao frowned slightly in the corner of the square. Naturally, he could sense that the aura of the dark clouds at the peak of the mountain was extremely weak. It was only at the level of 3 heavenly tribulations. In other words, Zhuowen was only a peak of the 2nd wheel of the Ultimate Emperor realm. Just how did Zhuowen surpass me and reach the peak with such strength? Lve Tao clenched his fists and sucked in a deep breath. His heart was filled with doubt. Luo Xing, Su Tianliang, Qin Batian and Zhu Qi also had the same doubts as Lve Tao. They were also surprised that Zhuowen was still only a peak of the 2nd wheel of the Ultimate Emperor realm. This little bastard must have known of some unknown shortcut in Zhongling Mountain. That's why he was able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. It can only be said that the bastard's luck is pretty good. However, when he reaches the 4th level of the Origin Qi Tower, this bastard won't have such good luck. Su Tianliang's gaze was gloomy. After seeing the 3 heavenly tribulations at the peak of the mountain, his face was filled with joy instead of shock. He was even more certain that Zhuowen had reached the peak of Zhongling Mountain by using some secret that they didn't know of. Originally, Su Tianliang was worried that Zhuowen's strength would become very strong. When he reached the 4th level, it wouldn't be so easy to deal with him. However, the 3 heavenly tribulations had completely dispelled the worries in Su Tianliang's heart. He knew that even if Zhuowen had survived 3 heavenly tribulations, he was only a peak of the 3rd wheel of the Ultimate Emperor realm. Although this kind of strength wasn't bad, it wasn't enough in Su Tianliang's eyes. Thinking of this, Su Tianliang made up his mind. When he reached the 4th level of the Origin Qi Tower, he would make Zhuowen suffer a fate worse than death. He also wouldn't let go of the secrets on Zhuowen's body, because he felt that there were many secrets on Zhuowen's body. Just as everyone in the square was filled with doubts, on the peak of the mountain, Zhuowen had his hands behind his back. He raised his head slightly, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth as he looked at the rolling dark clouds in the sky. After reaching the entry level of the Great Nirvana Sun, all 365 acupoints in his body had been opened. The strength of Zhuowen's body had already reached an unparalleled level. Just the strength of his body alone might not be able to break through the all-out attack of a peak Ultimate Emperor realm cultivator. With Zhuowen's current strength, he didn't need to fear the 3 heavenly tribulations at all. In fact, there was even an eager look in his eyes. Ever since he had broken through the entry level of the Great Nirvana Sun, he hadn't tested the strength of his body. I can use these 3 heavenly tribulations to test the strength of my body and see how strong it has become. Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he clenched his right hand. Instantly, countless golden veins covered his arm. The blazing golden light illuminated Zhuowen's face, making it look dazzling. Boom, boom, boom. Finally, the countless bolts of lightning and the dense dark clouds in the sky collided with each other. Afterwards, huge bolts of lightning the size of buckets descended, each one more terrifying and thick than the last. It was as if the entire mountain peak had been enveloped by countless bolts of lightning, forming a huge cage of lightning. Compared to the terrifyingly huge lightning bolts, Zhuowen's somewhat frail body appeared so small and insignificant. However, it was this insignificant figure that fearlessly extended its arms and attacked the countless bolts of lightning that directly shot towards it. The next moment, when the huge cage formed by countless thunderbolts appeared, a golden light that was as hot as the sun spread out in all directions. Ring-shaped golden ripples spread out, faintly revealing a powerful power that was gradually transmitted in the air. Boom, boom, boom. Instantly, the huge cage of lightning collapsed inch by inch as the golden light spread outwards, disappearing into nothingness. A figure covered in golden light silently stood there, like an ancient Buddha. Again, laughing loudly, Zhuowen was not afraid at all. In fact, he even seemed to be enjoying himself. This was because he discovered that even the 3 heavenly tribulations were unable to cause any harm to his body. Not even his skin was broken. Boom, boom, boom. The dark clouds in the sky grew denser and denser, and the lightning became even more terrifying. Bolt after bolt struck Zhuowen's body, as if they would not tire at all. However, Zhuowen only smiled faintly. He completely ignored them and allowed the lightning to strike his body. Surprisingly, it did not cause any harm to his body at all. Instead, after the lightning struck, Zhuowen's body began to glow faintly. The might of the lightning was a form of tempering, even though the effects on Zhuowen were minuscule. After breaking through the last bolt of lightning, Zhuowen stood quietly on the mountain peak. A terrifying aura surged out from his body. This aura is much stronger than the initial and intermediate Ultimate Emperor realm. Have I suddenly reached the advanced Ultimate Emperor realm? Zhuowen muttered to himself in surprise as he sensed the powerful aura in his body. Chapter 528. Bronze Coffin. Zhuowen nodded slightly. After reaching the Ultimate Emperor stage, he felt a wave of comfort in his heart. His gaze shifted slightly, and Zhuowen's gaze immediately focused on the scenery at the top of the mountain. However, what stunned Zhuowen was that there was nothing at the top of Zhongling Mountain. There was not even a blade of grass growing on the ground, and it looked extremely desolate. Moreover, the huge stone statue that he had seen at the bottom of the mountain was nowhere to be seen. It seemed that the stone statue was indeed an illusion. Could it be that there is nothing at the top of the mountain? Didn't Lu Nantian say that there was a great fortune at the top of Zhongling Mountain? Could it be that Lu Nantian was lying? Zhuowen's brows furrowed even tighter as he looked around. He had painstakingly climbed to the top of Zhongling Mountain, not just for the first place, but for the great fortune that Lu Nantian had mentioned. Wait, kid, take another 10 steps forward and see. Suddenly, Xiao Hei's voice rang out in his mind, and there was a trace of caution in her tone. Upon hearing this, Zhuowen slowly took 10 steps forward. Instantly, Zhuowen felt as if the world before him was spinning, and then the scenery before his eyes had completely changed. He saw that the greenery before him was dense, and the greenery gradually thickened. There was no longer the desolate and dilapidated scenery from before. It seems that what you saw earlier was also an illusion. This is the real thing. Xiao Hei's voice rang out once again, and she clicked her tongue in wonder. Only then did Zhuowen come to a sudden realization. It seemed that the top of Zhongling Mountain was indeed extraordinary, and there was actually such an illusion set up. If Xiao Hei had not reminded him, he was afraid that he would have really missed this place. There is a cave in front. Let's go take a look. Suddenly, Zhuowen's gaze moved, and he saw a rather short cave at the end of the greenery, and a trace of joy immediately appeared on his face. The cave was only half the height of a person. If he wanted to enter, he would have to bend his body down. It was extremely deep inside. Moreover, Zhuowen could also sense a trace of faintly discernible cold aura drifting inside, causing him to involuntarily shiver. Looks like there's more to this cave than meets the eye. Kid, are you going in? Xiaohe cautiously asked. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He knew that the treasures of this mountain peak were most likely in this cave. After pondering for a moment, he clenched his teeth and said, Enter. Of course I have to go in. It's very likely that there are great benefits inside. I can't just miss it. Then you have to be careful. I keep feeling that this cave is a little strange. Perhaps there is some kind of danger inside. Xiaohe nodded and said with some worry, I will pay attention to this matter. After all, we have already made it this far. If we return empty-handed, it really won't be worth it. Nodding his head, Zhuowen took a step forward and directly entered the short and deep cave. As he gently walked in the short cave, Zhuowen discovered that the inside of the cave was not as pitch black as it looked from the outside. Instead, there was a faint fluorescent glow. With Zhuowen's cultivation, he was naturally able to see through the entire cave. Along the way, Zhuowen did not discover anything. Other than the pitch-black rock walls, there was nothing else. After about an incense stick's worth of time, Zhuowen was still walking in the cave, as if there was no end to the cave. What's the matter with this cave? We have already walked for so long, but we still haven't reached the end? Frowning slightly, Zhuowen said with some annoyance in his heart. Don't worry. We are almost there. Xiaohe said rather calmly. Sure enough, Zhuowen walked for another 15 minutes and quickly reached the end of the cave. However, when he saw the scene at the end of the cave, his eyebrows tightened. At the end of the cave was an uneven rock wall. This rock wall was slightly different from the other rock walls. It was not brown in color, but a strange purplish black. In the pitch-black cave, it emitted a faint purplish glow, appearing distant and mysterious. With his eyebrows tightly knitted, Zhuowen arrived in front of this strange rock wall. He could clearly feel the mental energy in his Naiwen palace suddenly surging. The golden waves in his Naiwen palace rose higher and higher, as if expressing his joy. My Naiwen palace is actually reacting? What is this purplish rock wall? Suddenly, a sudden impulse surged from the depths of Zhuowen's heart, causing Zhuowen to involuntarily touch the purplish-black rock wall. Even if Zhuowen subconsciously tried to stop himself, Zhuowen's entire body seemed to be controlled by a strong force, and he could not move at all. Clang! The moment Zhuowen touched the purplish rock wall, the seemingly indestructible rock wall instantly collapsed and turned into dust. When the dust settled, Zhuowen discovered that there was actually a deep tunnel at the other end of the rock wall. I never thought that there would be another mystery behind this purplish rock wall. A strange look flashed across his eyes. Zhuowen's face revealed a hint of hesitation, but in the end, he gritted his teeth and stepped into the tunnel. The tunnel was much wider than the previous cave, and Zhuowen did not encounter any obstacles along the way. When he reached the end of the tunnel, Zhuowen's face suddenly revealed an expression as if he had seen a ghost. At the end of the tunnel, what appeared in front of Zhuowen was a rather vast hall, and in the middle of the hall sat an extremely magnificent bronze coffin. It can't be right? Why is it a coffin again? When I was at the training mountain, I had already encountered a coffin once. Why would I encounter a coffin again at the peak of Zhongling Mountain? The moment he saw the bronze coffin in front of him, Zhuowen suddenly felt a pain in his balls. He couldn't help but wonder if he was fated with coffins. Why did he keep encountering these kinds of coffins? Kid, perhaps you really are fated with coffins? Seeing Zhuowen's pained expression, Xiaohe teased him with a rare smile. Soon after, she sternly said, The golden coffin that you encountered at the last stage of the training mountain was a pretty good fortune. After all, it allowed you to obtain a terrifying body refining technique, like the Great Sun Nirvana. Now this bronze coffin is even more mysterious and terrifying than the golden coffin. I'm afraid that the things inside are much better than the golden coffin. Kid, don't complain. You really don't know how lucky you are. After she finished speaking, Xiaohe could not help but roll her eyes at Zhuowen. With an embarrassed smile, Zhuowen looked at the bronze coffin in front of him. He also knew that this coffin was very likely not simple, because he could faintly feel a terrifying aura from this bronze coffin. This aura was far more powerful than the golden coffin that he had encountered previously. I'm afraid that there might be another elite skeleton inside. Muttering to himself, Zhuowen took a step forward and immediately arrived in front of the bronze coffin. The surface of the bronze coffin in front of him revealed spots of rust, looking ancient and weathered. His eyes flickered. Zhuowen's right hand was immediately covered with golden veins. First, he respectfully bowed. Then Zhuowen violently slammed his palm on the coffin lid. Clang! The sound of metal clashing immediately resounded. Zhuowen let out a muffled groan and actually retreated a dozen steps before coming to a stop. His eyes were filled with shock as he looked at the bronze coffin in front of him. The bronze coffin lid in front of him had only moved a few inches. There was still a huge gap before it could be completely opened. This coffin lid is really incomparably thick. Hitting it feels like hitting a 10,000-foot-tall mountain. Rubbing his somewhat numb hand, Zhuowen's eyes finally revealed a trace of caution. He knew that he had to use all his strength in order to open this bronze coffin. 360 acupuncture points, open all of them for me. With a low roar, the countless acupuncture points in Zhuowen's body suddenly opened up like a whirlpool. Under the connection of the acupuncture points, a rich gold color spread all over Zhuowen's body. Instantly, Zhuowen's entire body turned into a blazing golden man. A terrifying aura overflowed from his body. Boom! Taking a step forward, Zhuowen violently slammed his palm on the coffin lid. Instantly, countless waves of air swirled in the air. The coffin lid, which was originally motionless, trembled slightly. Immediately, it moved about half a meter away, creating an opening. Swoosh! A pitch-black illusory figure suddenly shot out of the bronze coffin when an opening appeared. It immediately rushed towards Zhuowen's forehead. This illusory figure was only an inch in size. If one did not look carefully, it would be impossible to discover it. The moment this black shadow rushed over, Zhuowen's expression changed slightly. His right hand flickered with a golden light as he suddenly waved it. Instantly, it blocked in front of him. Pfft! Zhuowen only felt a piercing pain in his palm. Then, he was shocked to discover that his right palm had actually been directly pierced through by this tiny shadow. Drops of cherry-red blood continuously dripped down, looking mournful and ferocious. What? It actually directly pierced through my palm? The moment Zhuowen discovered that his palm had been pierced through, his expression could not help but change drastically. One had to know that all the acupuncture points in his body had been opened. The strength of his body was extremely terrifying. Even Lve Tao, who was at the ultimate emperor realm, might not be able to easily break through his body. However, this mysterious shadow in front of him had actually pierced through his palm like tofu. This truly shocked Zhuowen. After this shadow pierced through Zhuowen's palm, it actually continued to rush towards Zhuowen's forehead without slowing down. Its speed was even faster than before. As he watched the shadow get closer and closer, the ominous feeling in Zhuowen's heart grew stronger and stronger. His forehead was covered in cold sweat. He was certain that if this shadow were to drill into the depths of his forehead, he would probably be in imminent danger. However, this shadow was simply too fast. It was not very possible for Zhuowen to dodge now. Just what is this thing? What should I do? If it drills into my forehead, I'm afraid my life will be in danger. At this moment, Zhuowen finally felt a deep sense of fear. This tiny shadow actually brought him the threat of death. Roar! Suddenly, just as this shadow was about to reach Zhuowen's forehead, a deep dragon's roar suddenly erupted from Zhuowen's body. Then an ink-black mist swept out from Zhuowen's forehead. It actually transformed into a palm-sized ink-black dragon covered in scales. Chapter 529. Heavenly Rank Soul Treasure Trying to Escape? I'm afraid it won't be that easy. The little dragon that had emerged from between his brows was naturally Xiaohe. When Xiaohe saw that the black shadow was trying to escape, she snorted coldly. With a whoosh, she turned into a black bolt of lightning and instantly caught up to the fleeing black shadow. Boom! Xiaohe waved her right hand. Immediately, countless ink-black mist turned into a miniature cage in her palm, trapping the fleeing black shadow within. Only now did Zhuowen see the true appearance of the black shadow. It was only the size of a thumb, and looked like some kind of insect. Its shell was covered in sinister black hooks, and at the front of the black shadow was an inch-long spike. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed when his gaze focused on the spike of the unknown creature. He realized that the spike that had pierced through his palm was the spike at the front of the unknown creature. He knew that if Xiao He had not acted in time, the unknown creature might have directly burrowed into the space between his brows. The consequences would have been unimaginable. Xiao He, what is this thing? Its penetrative power is actually so strong. If you hadn't acted earlier, I'm afraid I would have been in danger. A trace of curiosity appeared on Zhuowen's face, especially when he saw the serious expression on Xiao He's face. He knew that the unknown creature was not simple. This creature is called a soul-devouring bug. It's a strange creature that specializes in devouring the souls of cultivators. Moreover, the spike at the front of this creature is extremely sharp. Even an ultimate ninth wheel Emperor Realm cultivator could be ambushed by it if they are not careful. If I hadn't discovered it earlier, you would probably be dead by now, Xiao He said solemnly. It's that terrifying? Even an ultimate ninth wheel Emperor Realm cultivator could be ambushed by it? Zhuowen could not help but be shocked when he heard this. He never thought that this tiny creature would actually be so powerful. It's a good thing that this beast is extremely afraid of the Dragon Clan's aura. That's why it was so afraid of me from the beginning. If this beast had really fought with its life on the line, I might not have been able to take it down so easily. Xiao He pursed her lips. Her gaze focused on the still trembling soul-devouring bug in the black cage, as she shook her head. Zhuowen also understood why the soul-devouring bug had fled when it saw Xiao He. It was because it was afraid of the Dragon Clan's aura. It looks like he had benefited from Xiao He this time. How do we deal with the soul-devouring insects? Zhuowen asked after a moment of hesitation. This soul-devouring insect was too much of a threat to him. He couldn't guarantee when this thing would break out of the black cage and attack him. The soul-devouring bug's body is extremely tough. You've also felt how terrifying it is just now. Therefore, it's basically impossible for you to destroy this soul-devouring bug with your current strength. Zhuowen frowned slightly when he heard this. The soul-devouring bug was quite a big threat. He did not dare to stay with such a terrifying creature for more than 15 minutes. After thinking about it, Zhuowen decided to quickly open the bronze coffin and leave Zhongling Mountain after obtaining the benefits inside. Let's take a look at what's inside this bronze coffin. After pondering for a moment, Zhuowen finally arrived in front of the bronze coffin. He slammed his right hand on the coffin lid, which had originally revealed a gap, and more than half of it was directly pushed open by Zhuowen. The scene inside was completely revealed to him. As Zhuowen expected, there was indeed a skeleton lying in the coffin. However, the surface of the skeleton was bluish-gray, which looked quite strange. In addition to the skeleton, Zhuowen also found a scarlet token inside. Gently picking up the scarlet token, Zhuowen looked at it carefully. He knew that the things that could be buried with this coffin were not simple goods. The blood-red token was only the size of a palm, and was completely blood-red. Moreover, its surface even faintly emitted the smell of blood, causing Zhuowen to frown slightly. He thought to himself that this blood-red token was strange. The scarlet token was engraved with words on both sides. The word blood was engraved on the front, and the word demon was engraved on the back. When combined, it was the word blood demon. Blood demon? Is this token related to the blood demon? Looking at the words on the token, Zhuowen frowned slightly. He could not help but sigh in his heart that he was really fated to meet the blood demon. When he fought with LV Yongsheng, the latter used the blood demon's moves. Now he encountered a token related to the blood demon at the top of Zhongling Mountain. Nonsense! Since the two words blood demon are written on this token, it means that this token has an extremely important relationship with the blood demon. Moreover, this dragon lord feels that this token is very likely not simple. I heard that there is an extremely powerful inheritance on the 4th floor called the blood demon inheritance. Perhaps this token is related to the blood demon inheritance on the 4th floor. Xiao He also saw the words on the scarlet token. He rubbed his chin and analyzed. Hearing this, Zhuowen also nodded. He also felt that this token was related to the blood demon inheritance on the 4th floor. However, it was said that the blood demon inheritance was extremely terrifying. In the past, many geniuses had chosen that inheritance. However, they all died in the inheritance land. Moreover, the most exciting genius in the previous batch, Lu Hantian, did not succeed in obtaining the blood demon inheritance. In the end, he fled the inheritance land in a sorry state and died in depression. From this, it could be seen that the blood demon inheritance was not something that ordinary people could obtain. Zhuowen knew his own limits. With his strength, it was very difficult to obtain the blood demon inheritance. Therefore, he did not have extravagant hopes of obtaining the blood demon inheritance. Zhuowen silently put away the blood-colored token and began to search the coffin again. He did not believe that such a large coffin would only contain such a useless blood-colored token. After searching for a long time, Zhuowen even searched every corner. However, Zhuowen was disappointed. There was nothing else in the coffin. Damn it! It's gone? There's actually nothing left. Zhuowen's face twitched as he took a deep breath, and he couldn't help but curse while he felt extremely depressed in his heart. Could it be that I've only obtained a blood-colored command token that doesn't seem to be of any use after working so hard to get here? Wait, kid, look at that corner. There seems to be some words. Go take a look. Suddenly, Xiaohei came to the corner of the coffin. She pointed at the corner with her little claws, and her eyes revealed a trace of light. Hearing this, Zhuowen immediately came to the corner where Xiaohei was. Sure enough, he saw a line of words there. Fated person, congratulations on reaching the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Being able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain means that your strength, perseverance, and insight far surpass ordinary people. This bronze coffin is a heaven-rank spirit treasure refined by me. Although it can't compare to a powerful monarch spirit treasure like Zhongling Mountain, its power is quite extraordinary. Now, as long as you agree to a request of mine and swear to the heavenly Tao, this bronze coffin will directly recognize you as its master. In the future, this heaven-rank spirit treasure will belong to you. My request is very simple. That is to head to the 4th level of the Origin Qi Tower and enter the Blood Demon Inheritance to obtain the Blood Demon Inheritance. Perhaps you still don't understand the Blood Demon Inheritance. The Blood Demon Inheritance on the 4th level is the most terrifying of all the inheritances. As long as you can obtain this inheritance, you will benefit endlessly. Of course, it is also the most difficult and dangerous. If you are not careful, it is very likely that your life will be in danger. However, you can rest assured. There is a blood demon token in the bronze coffin. This blood demon token is actually a type of pass to the blood demon inheritance. There are a total of 18 obstacles in the blood demon inheritance. As long as you pass the first 8 obstacles and use the blood demon token, you will be able to directly enter the core area of the blood demon inheritance. There, you will be able to directly receive the inheritance. Seeing this, Zhuowen frowned slightly. At the same time, he looked at the bronze coffin in front of him with some surprise. He did not expect that this ordinary bronze coffin in front of him would actually be a heaven-rank spirit treasure. Moreover, the owner of this coffin had said that this bronze coffin was personally refined by him. Obviously, the owner of this coffin was definitely a peerless expert. After all, not just anyone could refine a heaven-rank spirit treasure. It required a cultivation of at least the 4th venerable realm or above. However, what Zhuowen did not understand was why the owner of this coffin wanted him to receive the blood demon inheritance. Could it be that after he received the blood demon inheritance, the owner of this coffin would benefit in some way? Xiaohei. Shaking his head, Zhuowen had no choice but to ask Xiaohei for help. He felt that the owner of this coffin's request was somewhat strange. Continue reading. There is a paragraph of writing at the bottom. Xiaohei shook her head and suddenly pointed at the bottom. Hearing this, Zhuowen also noticed the writing at the bottom. As it was written at the bottom corner, Zhuowen did not notice it at first. A fated person. Perhaps you are very puzzled as to why I want you to receive the blood demon inheritance? I will tell you the truth. In fact, the ancient blood demon is not dead. Its soul is hidden in the land of the blood demon inheritance. At that time, I discovered it by chance. However, before I could say anything, I was discovered by the soul of the blood demon, and had a great battle with it. In the end, I was naturally defeated. However, the soul of the blood demon was not any better. It was severely injured by me, and fell into a deep sleep in the land of the inheritance. As long as the blood demon is given a certain amount of time, the soul of the blood demon will awaken again. The only way to destroy the soul of the blood demon is for someone to successfully obtain the blood demon inheritance. As long as the blood demon inheritance is taken away by someone, the soul of the blood demon will have no medium to rely on. At that time, it will naturally disperse. However, the blood demon inheritance is too difficult. Very few warriors can successfully obtain it. However, a fated person, since you were able to climb to the top of Zhongling Mountain, it means that you are not an ordinary genius warrior. You might be able to successfully obtain the blood demon inheritance and completely destroy the soul of the blood demon. Of course, if you are unwilling, I will not force you. After all, this kind of thing is consensual. However, you cannot take away the blood demon token and the bronze coffin. These two items were originally prepared for entering the land of the blood demon inheritance. Seeing this, Zhuowen's expression turned ugly. Needless to say, the land of the blood demon inheritance was extremely dangerous. Zhuowen could ignore the blood demon token, but he had no choice but to pay attention to the bronze coffin. After all, this was a genuine heaven-rank soul treasure. It would be of great benefit to him. Chapter 530. The Bronze Coffin's Function. Xiaohei, do you think I should follow this person's request and head to the Blood Devil's inheritance land? Zhuowen was still somewhat hesitant in his heart. After all, this bronze coffin was a genuine heavenly soul treasure. It was a soul treasure that was even more terrifying than the 9-wheel burning sky cauldron in his possession. If he could obtain this soul treasure, his strength would definitely rise to a whole new level. Xiaohei pondered for a moment, then spread out his hands and said, "This matter still needs to be decided by you. However, this dragon lord must warn you in advance that the Blood Devil's inheritance will definitely be extremely difficult. Even if you succeed, your chances of success are not high. Therefore, you should consider it carefully." Hearing this, Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He gritted his teeth and said, "I'll do it. It would be a waste if I don't take the heavenly soul treasure. After all, after reaching the 4th floor, I will have to fight for the inheritance. It's not impossible to attempt the Blood Devil's inheritance land." In the end, Zhuowen could not resist the temptation of the heavenly soul treasure. After all, heavenly soul treasures were just too rare. Even the house of Marquis Qin probably did not have many of them. How could Zhuowen let go of such a precious item? As for the Blood Devil's inheritance land, although Zhuowen was extremely afraid of it, he also knew that the owner of this bronze coffin had already prepared this Blood Devil token and bronze coffin for him. In fact, it could already be considered as reducing the difficulty of the Blood Devil's inheritance land by a lot. Therefore, Zhuowen decided to take a gamble. After all, Zhuowen had heard of the Blood Devil's inheritance land from Lu Nantian long ago. Even Lu Hantian had almost fallen from this terrifying inheritance. However, if he succeeded in obtaining it, the benefits would be limitless. The path of martial arts is like sailing against the current. If you don't advance, you will fall behind. If you shrink back even a little bit, I'm afraid that your future achievements will not be too high. This time, I will take a good gamble for the Blood Devil's inheritance land." As he spoke, Zhuowen's eyes flashed. He took a step forward, casually took out a dagger, and lightly cut his palm. Immediately, cherry-red blood flowed out from his palm. His bloody palm gently pressed against the bronze coffin, then silently swore to the heavens in his heart that this time, he would definitely enter the Blood Devil's inheritance land. Otherwise, he would be destroyed by the heavens and the Devil's inheritance land. The heavens. After making the oath, a blazing green light burst out from the bronze coffin. Then, The bronze coffin shrank to the size of a palm, quietly lying in Zhuowen's palm. At the same time, the information about how to use the bronze coffin entered Zhuowen's mind. Zhuowen, who had been troubled about how to use the coffin, suddenly felt enlightened after receiving this information. It turned out that this bronze coffin was not an offensive spirit treasure. In a sense, it was an auxiliary heaven-rank spirit treasure. However, its use surprised Zhuowen. The information in his mind introduced the use of the bronze coffin. It could create powerful puppets, and the puppets were completely controlled by Zhuowen. The use of creating puppets didn't seem very eye-catching, and was even a little ordinary. However, the puppets created by the bronze coffin weren't those low-level puppets that couldn't even truss up a chicken. Instead, they had a certain level of intelligence, and were high-level puppets that were similar to human martial artists. These puppets even had a certain level of human emotions. Of course, this was not what attracted Zhuowen. What attracted Zhuowen was that as long as enough treasures were placed in the bronze coffin, it could even create ultimate emperor stage powerhouses. Moreover, there was no limit to the number of ultimate emperor stage powerhouses. A ultimate emperor stage powerhouse was an existence comparable to the leaders of the 5 superpowers in the prefecture. Aside from the number 1 powerhouse in Muqing County Lu Nantian, who had stepped into the 4th emperor stage, the other 4 leaders, Su Chong, Qin Nye, Xianyuan Li, and the master of the meteorite, were all at the peak of the ultimate emperor stage. In other words, if Zhuowen had enough treasures as materials for the bronze coffin, he could use it to create a puppet for a supreme expert like the ultimate emperor realm. With such a puppet, no matter how much Su Chong hated him, he wouldn't dare to touch him at all. Even the other supergiants would treat him with respect. Kid, this bronze coffin is a heaven-rank spirit treasure. Tell me what it does. Don't just stand there and laugh like an idiot, Xiao He said as he knocked Zhuowen's forehead when he saw Zhuowen laughing like an idiot. After regaining his senses, Zhuowen explained the bronze coffin's use to Xiao He in detail. Xiao He revealed a trace of surprise after he finished listening. It can even create a supreme expert like the ultimate 9 wheels emperor realm. This bronze coffin is indeed impressive. I wonder if it can create 4 puppets at the ultimate 9 wheels emperor realm? Blackie smacked his lips and laughed. That's not very possible. It's said that the strongest puppet is only at the pinnacle level of the 9 wheels emperor realm. If even 4-wheel emperor realm experts, who are strong enough to be conferred the title of Marquis, this bronze coffin is too abnormal. Zhuowen shook his head. After all, the bronze coffin was only a heaven-rank spirit treasure. If a heaven-rank spirit treasure could create 4th emperor stage puppets, then it would be truly heaven-defying. Therefore, the ultimate emperor stage puppets could be considered the peak. Yes, you're right. However, if you want to create an ultimate emperor stage puppet, the resources required would be extremely terrifying, right? What kind of puppets can you create with the resources you have now? Xiao He suddenly asked. I'm not too sure either. However, apart from being able to create puppets, this bronze coffin's outer shell is also abnormally hard. It can be used as a defensive spirit treasure. Zhuowen shook his head as an awkward expression appeared on his face. With the resources he had accumulated, it was probably impossible for him to create an ultimate emperor stage puppet. However, the owner of the bronze coffin had probably intended for him to use it as a defensive spirit treasure when he gave him the coffin to explore the Blood Devil's land of inheritance. After all, with his wealth, how could he gather so many resources in such a short time to create an ultimate emperor stage puppet? You should have a lot of resources on you. After all, you took the Qianquan bags of the enemies you killed in the past. I'm afraid you're planning to bring all those resources back to the Zhuo family, right? However, since you have the bronze coffin now, you can use those resources to create puppets. You can forget about creating an ultimate emperor stage puppet. However, you might be able to create an ultimate emperor stage puppet with 5 wheels. This will definitely be of help to you when you enter the Blood Devil's land of inheritance. Xiao He looked at Zhuowen with a solemn expression. He knew very well that the 4th floor of the Blood Devil's land of inheritance was extremely terrifying. If Zhuowen was not adequately prepared, The chances of him dying were very high. Hearing this, a trace of hesitation appeared on Zhuowen's face. He gritted his teeth and said, "All right. Then I'll use all those resources. I hope the puppets I create won't disappoint me." As he spoke, Zhuowen suddenly slapped his Qingquan bag. Immediately, countless streams of light flew out and entered the bronze coffin. These streams of light included spiritual herbs, spirit treasures, pills, and other items with sufficient energy. However, Zhuowen had no use for them. Originally, Zhuowen had planned to bring these things back to the Zhuo family. However, it seemed that this plan had to be put aside for the time being. Now he had to increase his strength as soon as possible. After all, after the battle for the Vitality Tower, Su Chong would not let this matter rest. Clang! When the last stream of light flew out of Zhuowen's Qingquan bag and into the bronze coffin, the cyan coffin lid suddenly closed. Soon after, the bronze coffin quietly floated above Zhuowen's head. Zhuowen knew that it would take at least 2 or 3 days to create puppets from the bronze coffin. Therefore, he was not in a hurry. Instead, he silently sat cross-legged on the ground and began to silently cultivate with the help of the rich yuan qi in the surroundings. After all, this was the peak of Zhongling Mountain. The density of yuan qi here was far from what other places could compare to. Zhuowen could use these few days to consolidate his realm and strength. Time gradually passed. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. During these 3 days, many cultivators in the square outside Zhongling Mountain would occasionally focus their gazes on the peak of Zhongling Mountain. They were all guessing when Zhuowen would come down and what benefits Zhuowen would obtain. On the platform, Lu Nantian and the other leaders of the various forces were silently waiting for Zhuowen's appearance. After all, only after Zhuowen came out would they announce the names of the top 100 participants and the opening of the 4th floor of the Vitality Tower. At the peak of Zhongling Mountain, Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. An imperceptible light flashed in the depths of his eyes. At the same time, an aura surged out from his body like a tide. I never thought that the air at the peak of Zhongling Mountain would actually contain a trace of spirit qi. 3 days have actually allowed me to advance from the late stage to the peak stage of the ultimate emperor realm. Zhuowen could not help but reveal a trace of joy when he sensed the powerful aura bursting out from his body. Rumble! Suddenly, the bronze coffin that had been floating above Zhuowen's head trembled slightly. Then, like a meteor, it directly landed in front of Zhuowen. Creak! The lid of the bronze coffin gently opened, and a black figure slowly walked out. This was a young man around the age of 22. He wore a blue robe, and his shoulder-length hair was casually draped over his back. His face was filled with indifference and dullness. However, Zhuowen felt a threatening aura from this young man. Looks like this is a puppet created by the bronze coffin. It looks very real. It's basically no different from a human. It's much more realistic than the reverse spirit puppet you obtained back then. Xiao He sized up the white-clothed young man before him and clicked his tongue in wonder. It's indeed extremely realistic. Moreover, this puppet's strength is not bad. It actually possesses the strength of an early-stage Ultimate Emperor Realm cultivator. Although this strength is not comparable to LVE Tao's, it's not far off. Chapter 531. By Lin. Greetings, Master. The young man in white knelt on the ground with one knee as he stared at Zhuowen with a burning gaze. It was as if in his eyes, Zhuowen was the person he admired the most. It has some spiritual intelligence, and its speech is very clear. Xiao He nodded. Obviously, he was quite satisfied with the puppet in front of him. Zhuowen also sized up the puppet in front of him. Other than its somewhat dull expression, the puppet's appearance was almost exactly the same as a human's. If one did not carefully examine it, one would not be able to tell that it was actually a lifeless puppet. From now on, you will be called by Lin. This way it will be easier to call you in the future. Zhuowen casually gave the puppet a name in front of him. Thank you, Master, for giving me a name. Bai Lin heard this, and a smile immediately appeared on his face as he cupped his hands. Zhuowen nodded when he heard this. After that, he gestured with his right hand, and Bai Lin was immediately absorbed into the bronze coffin. After that, The bronze coffin returned to the size of a palm and was caught by Zhuowen. Looking around, Zhuowen said softly, "Since this matter is over, we should leave Zhongling Mountain." Xiao He on the side nodded when he heard this. He immediately turned into a black light and drilled into the depths of Zhuowen's eyebrows. Zhuowen gently took out his identity token and formed a seal with his right hand. Suddenly, a white light enveloped Zhuowen and Zhuowen's figure slowly disappeared. In the square outside Zhongling Mountain, many genius warriors were staring at Zhongling Mountain. They were all waiting for Zhuowen to appear. It's been 3 days. Why hasn't Zhuowen come out yet? Did something happen at the top of the mountain? I'm afraid he got a great benefit at the top of the mountain. After all, the top of Zhongling Mountain is extremely mysterious. It is said that there is a great fortune inside. However, no one has ever gone up, so no one knows what is inside. If there is really a great fortune, Zhuowen will probably get a lot of benefits inside. While many martial artists were complaining, a beam of light shot up from the end of the square, and a slender figure slowly appeared in front of everyone. Swish! Swish! The instant this figure appeared in front of everyone, the gazes of everyone in the square gathered on this figure. After which, the entire square became silent because the person who appeared in front of them was Zhuowen, whom they had been waiting for all this while. Feeling the various gazes directed at him, Zhuowen ignored them all. Instead, he casually found a corner in the square and sat down, waiting for the opening of the 4th floor. Brother Zhuo, you're really awesome. You actually surpassed Lve Tao and obtained first place in Zhongling Mountain. You even climbed to the peak of Zhongling Mountain and broke the record of Zhongling Mountain for thousands of years. A fervent voice suddenly sounded in Zhuowen's ears. Slightly raising his head, Zhuowen immediately saw Ouyang Hanxian dressed in white. He had an excited expression as he walked in front of Zhuowen. After that, he sat beside Zhuowen without any trace of politeness. Brother Hanxian. Seeing Ouyang Hanxian, Zhuowen's face revealed a trace of a smile. Broken Rock City's Ouyang Hanxian, Ouyang Yuntu, and Qiu Chou had helped him a lot. Although this Ouyang Hanxian was somewhat scheming, he was indeed not bad to him, and could be considered one of his few friends. Brother Zhuo, you don't know how wonderful the expressions of the martial artists in the square were when you climbed to the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Even the faces of the 5 super geniuses were even more wonderful. At this moment, Ouyang Hanxian was extremely excited. He kept telling Zhuowen about the expressions of the other martial artists. When he climbed Zhongling Mountain, he described it vividly, while Zhuowen sat at the side and listened with a smile. After Ouyang Hanxian finished speaking, Zhuowen asked curiously, Brother Hanxian, I wonder if you entered the top 100 this time? Hearing this, Ouyang Hanxian's face revealed a smug expression. He smiled and said, I was lucky enough to enter the top 100. I just happened to be ranked 100th. It could be said that it was all due to luck. Zhuowen was slightly surprised. Ouyang Hanxian's cultivation wasn't high. He was only at the initial stage of the second wheel Extreme Emperor stage. However, he was actually able to enter the top 100 of Zhongling Mountain. It seemed that Ouyang Hanxian had some secrets. However, Zhuowen naturally wouldn't dig into this matter. He just changed the topic at the right time. After all, everyone had their own secrets. For example, Zhuowen had many more secrets than others. It is said that only 5 ancient inheritances will appear on the 4th floor of the Origin Qi Tower. I'm afraid that these 5 ancient inheritances are not fated with us. They should have been dominated by the 5 super geniuses. However, Brother Zhuo, with your potential and strength, you should have the possibility of competing for an ancient inheritance. Ouyang Hanxian sighed slightly. Then, he looked hopefully at Zhuowen in front of him. He knew that others might not be able to compete with the 5 super geniuses, but Zhuowen in front of him was very likely to obtain one of the ancient inheritances. After all, Zhuowen's performance on Zhongling Mountain was too amazing. In addition, even Lv Yongxing had been defeated by Zhuowen. Therefore, other genius warriors had already thought that Zhuowen was the most likely candidate to obtain an inheritance from the 5 super geniuses. That's not necessarily true. The ancient inheritances on the fourth floor rely on one's own opportunities. They may not be obtained by strength. Zhuowen shook his head. However, with his current strength, it wasn't difficult for him to obtain one of the ancient inheritances. However, his goal this time wasn't an ordinary inheritance. It was the most terrifying blood devil inheritance. Therefore, he wasn't very interested in the 5 new inheritances that had appeared. Just as Zhuowen was conversing with Ouyang Hanxian, LV Yitao suddenly stood up and walked towards Zhuowen's direction. LV Yitao's actions immediately attracted everyone's attention. However, when they saw that LV Yitao was walking towards Zhuowen's direction, everyone's eyes revealed a strange expression. LV Yitao is actually walking towards Zhuowen. Could it be that he wants to find trouble with Zhuowen? Probably not. After all, there are ancient restrictions on the plaza. Furthermore, LV Nantian and the rest are watching from outside. LV Yitao shouldn't be reckless. Discussion slowly sounded out. Everyone was puzzled by LV Yitao's actions. Zhuowen also sensed something. He raised his head slightly, and his gaze immediately fell on LV Yitao, who was walking towards him. He frowned slightly, but he was secretly on guard in his heart. LV Yitao was a genuine ultimate 5-wheel emperor. If this person really wanted to find trouble with him, he would have to use all his strength. He might even be forced to use the puppet by Lin. Ouyang Hanxian, who was beside him, also noticed LV Yitao walking over. His expression was slightly startled, but he still stood firmly beside Zhuowen. He stared at LV Yitao without fear. LV Yitao directly ignored Ouyang Hanxian. Instead, he stared at Zhuowen and said indifferently, "Zhuowen, what is the stone statue on the peak of Zhongling Mountain? Can you tell me?" Hearing this, Zhuowen couldn't help but be stunned. He didn't expect LV Yitao to come and ask him this question. After pondering for a moment, Zhuowen shook his head and said, "There is no stone statue on the peak of the mountain. That stone statue is an illusion in your heart. In other words, the 10,000th step of Zhongling Mountain does not have any pressure. It is just an illusion." Hearing these words, LV Yitao's pupils shrank. He recalled everything that happened when he reached the 10,000th step, as well as the stone statue that looked down at him from the top of the mountain. He finally realized that the one who eliminated him was himself. Just as Zhuowen had said, the 10,000th step didn't have any pressure. It was just an illusion that entered one's heart. If his heart wasn't in chaos at that time, the 10,000th step would have been broken by itself. However, his heart was in chaos at that time. He knew that if his heart wasn't in chaos at that time, the one who would reach the top of the mountain would be him, and not Zhuowen in front of him. Actually, you could have won, but you lost to yourself in the end. Zhuowen shook his head and said meaningfully. Others might not understand this sentence, but LV Yitao understood it. His indifferent face couldn't help but reveal a trace of bitterness. "Zhuowen, a loss is a loss. After all, the one who reached the top of the mountain was you and not me. It's useless to regret now. Moreover, to be able to force me to that point, your heart is very strong and I admire it very much. When your strength increases a little, I will find you to compete again." Taking a deep look at Zhuowen, LV Yitao slowly turned around and returned to his place. Not far away, Su Tianliang, who originally wanted to watch a good show, had a disappointed expression on his face. He thought that LV Yitao would teach Zhuowen a lesson. In the end, he was happy for nothing. "Forget it. When we enter the 4th floor, we can also teach this little bastard a lesson." Su Tianliang muttered hatefully. On the other hand, Zhuowen silently looked at LV Yitao in the distance, a thoughtful look on his face. "Just now when LV Yitao left, he sent me a message. You have to be careful of Su Tianliang, and Zhu Qi Luoxing just told me that these 2 people will probably harm you in the 4th floor. Although your potential is very strong, your strength is still not enough. If you want to save your life, it's best to avoid those 2 people." This LV Yitao's temperament is very good. He's not like his second and third brothers, who are full of evil tricks and seek revenge for the smallest grievance. He has the demeanor of a gentleman. Xiaohei's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Her words couldn't hide her admiration for LV Yitao. Zhuowen also nodded. It seemed that this Lve Tao was able to become the #1 genius of Muqing County not by chance. This person's talent and temperament could be considered to be the best choice. His future achievements would definitely be limitless. However, since Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi want to harm me, then when we enter the 4th floor, don't blame me for being ruthless. As he spoke, Zhuowen tilted his head slightly. His gaze immediately focused on Su Tianliang, who had a gloomy expression, and Zhu Qi, who had an indifferent expression. Putting aside Zhu Qi for the time being, Zhuowen would definitely settle old scores with Su Tianliang. Chapter 532. Ancient ruins. The crowd in the square did not have to wait for long before a vast and solemn voice resounded through the sky like a tide. They knew that Lu Nantian had finally spoken. Congratulations to those who have entered the top 100. You now have the qualifications to enter the 4th floor of the Origin Qi Tower. As soon as these words were spoken, those who entered the top 100 revealed excited expressions. As for those who did not enter the top 100, their faces were gloomy. The 4th floor of the Origin Qi Tower is filled with ancient ruins. There are many treasures left behind from ancient times in those ruins. If you have the strength and opportunity, you can even obtain rare treasures like the Heavenly Soul treasure. As for the place where the ancient inheritance is located, it is at the end of the 4th floor. There is a huge land of inheritance there. If you want to enter the land of inheritance, you must obtain the corresponding key. This key is hidden in the ancient ruins outside the land of inheritance. Let me make it clear that there are only a total of 10 keys. Therefore, only 10 people are qualified to enter the land of inheritance. There will be 5 ancient inheritances that are open to the public. Of course, in addition to these 5, there is also an inheritance that has always been open to the public. That is the Blood Demon inheritance. However, this old man has a word of advice for you. The process of inheriting the Blood Demon inheritance is extremely terrifying. If you are unable to inherit it successfully, you will undoubtedly die. Therefore, if you do not have a certain level of strength, it is best not to choose the Blood Demon inheritance. Moreover, in my opinion, among the 100 of you, I am afraid that not one will be able to successfully obtain the Blood Demon inheritance. Therefore, it is best to act according to your strength. As soon as these words were spoken, the crowd in the square burst into an uproar. They had naturally heard of the terror of the Blood Demon inheritance. At the same time, the Blood Demon inheritance was considered the strongest inheritance in the land of inheritance. It was the highest inheritance that surpassed the other inheritances. Once one obtained the Blood Demon inheritance, it would not be a problem for them to enter the 4 sovereigns' realm in the future. They might even be able to peek into the Supreme Sovereign realm. With such strength, they would be able to stand on equal footing with the Azure Emperor of the Azure Mystic Empire. Everyone was extremely clear about the importance of the inheritance. This was because the ancient inheritance did not only contain secret martial arts manuals, but also the accumulated experience of generations. After all, the inheritance condensed all the essence of the ancient sect. Obtaining the inheritance also meant obtaining the accumulated results of generations of ancient sections. It went without saying how precious such results were to a cultivator. It was precisely because of this reason that ancient inheritances possessed such a strong allure, causing countless geniuses to fight for them. And the more powerful an ancient inheritance was, the more terrifying it would be for a cultivator. And the Blood Demon inheritance, which was known as the #1 inheritance in the land of inheritance, was undoubtedly the inheritance that gave the greatest boost to a cultivator. However, the Blood Devil's inheritance was infamous. Although the Blood Devil's inheritance was tempting enough, many people knew their limits. Therefore, they didn't plan to place their attention on it. After hearing Lu Nantian's last sentence, the indifferent Lu Nantian clenched his fists slightly. He knew that Lu Nantian's words were meant for himself. Do what you can. Lu Yitao's eyes flickered, but he still sighed in the end. He knew how much Lu Nantian expected of him. After all, the War of the 9 Counties was about to begin. If something happened to him because of the Blood Devil's inheritance, this War of the Nine Counties would probably be the same as the previous one. In the previous War of the Origin Qi Tower, Lu Hantian, the #1 genius of Muqing County, stubbornly chose the Blood Devil's inheritance. In the end, he failed and died, leaving the other geniuses of Muqing County without a leader. Therefore, Muqing County lost miserably that time. If Lu Yitao entered the 4th floor this time, and chose the Blood Devil's inheritance like Lu Hantian, he would most likely end up in a disaster. At that time, the War of the Nine Counties would very likely repeat the previous fiasco. Therefore, Lu Nantian said to do what you can. Forget it. Right now, I need to focus on the big picture. Shaking his head, Lu Yitao also had no confidence in the Blood Devil's inheritance. After all, Lu Hantian died because of it, so he naturally didn't have much confidence. However, I wonder if Zhuowen can successfully pass the trial inside and obtain the inheritance if he enters the Blood Devil's inheritance? Thinking of this, Lu Yitao couldn't help but look at Zhuowen, who was not far away. He knew that Zhuowen was not simple to be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Even he couldn't see through the former, so he couldn't help but think that Zhuowen might be able to pass the Blood Devil's inheritance. However, he quickly threw away this unrealistic idea. Although Zhuowen reached the peak of Zhongling Mountain, it only meant that this child had extremely high potential. However, his strength was too weak. Entering the Blood Devil's inheritance was simply courting death. I really don't know which monstrous cultivator will obtain the Blood Devil's inheritance on the 4th floor, or if no one will ever be qualified to obtain it. In the sky, Lu Nantian's voice was silent for a while before it resounded again. If no one has any objections, then this lord will now open the entrance to the 4th floor of the Origin Qi Tower for all of you. Just as LV Nantian's voice fell, thick white light pillars sprinkled down from the distant horizon. There were more than 100 pillars of light that were like pillars that supported the heavens. They enveloped a portion of the martial artists in the square, and the martial artists that were enveloped were undoubtedly the top 100 geniuses. The other cultivators in the square, who weren't enveloped by the light pillars, looked at the figures in the light pillars with envy. They all knew that the true opportunity of the Origin Qi Tower was on the 4th floor. After all, the 4th floor of the Yuan Qi Tower contained an endless amount of ancient ruins. Even if those in the top 100 could not compete for 5 ancient inheritances, the treasures in the ancient ruins were all extremely valuable and powerful. Even obtaining one of them would greatly increase one's strength. This time, 5 new ancient inheritances will appear on the 4th floor of the Origin Qi Tower. I wonder which 5 will obtain these 5 ancient inheritances. It should be the 5 super geniuses. After all, the ancient inheritances that appear every time the Origin Qi Tower battle appear, they are basically divided among the geniuses of the 5 super forces. That's true, but that Zhuowen also has a very good chance of obtaining one of the ancient inheritances. After all, his performance on Zhongling Mountain was too amazing. Not necessarily that Zhuowen's performance on Zhongling Mountain was so eye-catching. It can only mean that his potential is very strong. However, his strength is only around the Ultimate Emperor stage. There is still a certain gap between him and the 5 super geniuses. The beam of light on the square flashed, and the 100 geniuses disappeared from the square in an instant. The rest of the warriors on the square naturally began to discuss without restraint. Of course, their most fervent topic was naturally the ownership of the 5 ancient inheritances in the land of inheritance. Although Zhuowen's performance on Zhongling Mountain was very amazing, no one was very optimistic about him. After all, Zhongling Mountain not only tested one's strength, but also one's potential. Obviously, the fact that Zhuowen could reach the peak meant that his potential was limitless. With Zhuowen's potential, as long as he was given enough time, surpassing the 5 super geniuses wouldn't be a problem. However, Zhuowen's strength was still too weak. Compared to the other 5 super geniuses, he was still lacking by a large margin. Of course, discussions were just discussions. If these people knew Zhuowen's true strength, they probably wouldn't be so unconfident about Zhuowen. After all, All 365 acupoints in Zhuowen's body had been opened. The nirvana of the Great Sun had reached the beginner level, and the strength of his body had reached an unparalleled level. His strength was comparable to that of an ultimate emperor stage expert. Even an ordinary ultimate emperor stage expert might not necessarily be a match for Zhuowen. Among the 5 super geniuses, Su Tianliang and Qin Batian were the weakest. They were both at the peak of the ultimate emperor stage. Zhu Qi was slightly more difficult to deal with, as he was at the early stage of the ultimate emperor stage. However, with the strength of Zhuowen's body, he didn't fear the 3 of them at all. In fact, if they were to fight, Zhuowen's chances of victory were very high. However, Luo Xing and Lve Tao were 2 super geniuses. Zhuowen was probably much more difficult to deal with. It was said that Luo Xing was already at the peak of the ultimate emperor stage. If Zhuowen only relied on the strength of his body, he probably wouldn't be a match for Luo Xing. However, if he added in some of his trump cards, he might be able to fight evenly with Luo Xing. On the other hand, the number 1 genius of Muqing County, Lve Tao, had already reached the peak of the ultimate emperor stage. If Zhuowen didn't take out the heaven-tier spirit treasure, the bronze coffin, he probably wouldn't be able to resist Lve Tao at all. However, the bronze coffin was Zhuowen's final trump card, so Zhuowen wouldn't reveal it too early. With Lve Tao's attitude, he probably wouldn't lower himself to deal with Zhuowen. Of course, even if he had to deal with Zhuowen, Zhuowen wouldn't be afraid. Zhuowen only saw a white light flash before his eyes as a trace of dizziness flashed through his mind. When he gradually recovered, Zhuowen discovered that he was no longer in the plaza on the 3rd floor. This was a small barren hill. Within a radius of 10 miles around the small hill, there was a transparent oval-shaped barrier of light. Outside the barrier of light was an endless wasteland, which seemed to be filled with vicissitudes and ancientness. At this moment on the small hill, a beam of light flashed. The other cultivators were also teleported in by the beam of light. They were all rubbing their heads, their faces confused and puzzled. Obviously, they weren't used to the unfamiliar environment around them. This should be the 4th floor of the Origin Qi Tower, Zhuowen muttered to himself as he looked around at the barren environment. Brother Zhua. At this moment, the white-clothed Ouyang Hanxian was also teleported in. He hurriedly came to Zhuowen's side. Here he only knew Zhuowen. Moreover, Zhuowen was stronger than him. Being with Zhuowen was at least much safer than being alone. After all, the 4th floor of the Origin Qi Tower was no longer restricted by the ancient restrictions and rules. It was hard to guarantee that there wouldn't be some cultivators with bad intentions who wanted to rob the Qianquan bags from other cultivators. Chapter 533. Trouble. Slightly nodding his head towards Ouyang Hanxian, Zhuowen's eyes narrowed as he gazed at the outside environment through the light barrier. He discovered that there were still a few sparse buildings on the endless wasteland outside. However, those buildings looked extremely dilapidated. It looked like a scene of decay after a war. It was not difficult to guess that a long time ago, an extremely tragic war had taken place on this wasteland. Ouyang Hanxian also noticed Zhuowen's line of sight. His gaze also landed on the dilapidated buildings in the distance. With a smile, he said, "Those dilapidated buildings should be the remnants of the ancient times. These remnants of the ancient times are basically like this, extremely dilapidated." Ancient ruins? Hearing this, Zhuowen's eyes lit up. If the ancient ruins were relatively intact, there would be good things inside. Now Zhuowen was extremely short of resources. If he could obtain enough resources from these ancient ruins, he was afraid that he could rely on the bronze coffin to raise Bai Lin's strength to the ultimate 9-wheel emperor realm. Once Bai Lin's strength reached the ultimate 9-wheel emperor realm, Zhuowen would not be afraid of the revenge of the Marquis of Baichuan's mansion. At this time, the 100 warriors on the small hill had basically all arrived. These warriors were close friends, or disciples of the same force. They gathered in groups of 3 or 5, divided into small groups. "Zhuowen, you have to be careful of Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi. I'm afraid they will do you harm. If you can join the team of our Jade Lady Star Court. With the strength of our Jade Lady Star Court, Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi will not easily touch you. While Zhuowen was silently observing the surrounding environment, a clear and melodious voice slowly rang in his ears. Slightly startled, Zhuowen slightly raised his head and immediately saw Qing Lian, who was in the team of Jade Lady Star Court, not far away, looking at him with concern. Looking at the concerned expression on Qing Lian's face, Zhuowen felt a little warm in his heart. He nodded at her and replied with a sound transmission, "Miss Qing Lian, thank you for your kindness. I have my ways to deal with Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi." Hearing Zhuowen's words, Qing Lian knew that Zhuowen probably had a backup plan. Therefore, she wasn't worried. After all, she had seen the various records that Zhuowen had created along the way. Therefore, she still believed in Zhuowen's strength. "Don't call me Miss Qing Lian in the future. Just call me Qing Lian. After all, we are considered friends." After hesitating for a while, Qing Lian suddenly shyly transmitted her voice. On the elegant face of Qing Lian, who was in the team of Jade Lady Star Court, there was a rare touch of shyness, like a lotus flower emerging from the water. Zhuowen naturally saw Qing Lian's unusual behavior. He hesitated for a moment and said, "Since that's the case, I'll directly call you Qing Lian in the future. After all, you treat me as a friend, so I, Zhuowen, will naturally treat you as a friend. You have to be careful in the ancient ruins this time." I will." Seeing that Zhuowen really called her by her name, Qing Lian was overjoyed and the corners of her mouth bloomed into a sweet smile. However, Zhuowen did not see any of this because when he was talking to Qing Lian, two malicious gazes were fixed on his back, causing the hairs on his back to stand on end. Tilting his head slightly, Zhuowen immediately saw that not far behind him, the owners of these two gazes were Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi at this moment. The two of them had quite a number of subordinates beside them. Basically, they were all disciples of the House of Marquis Baichuan and the House of the Imperial Sword. After all, the 5 great super factions were the 5 strongest factions in Wuxia County. They produced many geniuses. Hence, the 5 great factions occupied nearly half of the top 100 spots this time around. On average, 10 people from each of the 5 great factions had entered the 4th level. "Zhuowen, this time, you won't be able to escape even if you have wings. After the seal outside the small hill is broken, it will be the time of your death. Cherish your last moments." Su Tianliang's gaze was cold. He brought the 20 people behind him and directly came in front of Zhuowen. His gaze was condescending as he stared at Zhuowen. Zhu Qi stood beside Su Tianliang with his hands crossed in front of his chest. With a cold expression he said, "Zhuowen, actually, I, Zhu Qi, have no interest in intervening in the grudge between you and Su Tianliang. If you give me your Qingquan bag, then I won't intervene in the grudge between you and Su Tianliang. How about it? Brother Zhu, didn't we agree on this?" Zhu Qi's words immediately caused Su Tianliang's expression to change slightly. He had clearly discussed with Zhu Qi that they would join hands to kill Zhuowen after entering the 4th level. After that, they would split the items in Zhuowen's Qingquan bag equally. However, Zhu Qi's words immediately caused Su Tianliang's expression to become extremely ugly. "Hehe, Brother Su, don't forget that I'm helping you because of this kid's Qingquan bag. If this kid knows what's good for him and hands over his Qingquan bag, then I naturally don't need to fight with him. After all, I'm in a hurry to go to the ancient ruins to find the key." Zhu Qi coldly snorted. His face did not have the slightest bit of shame for breaking the agreement. Instead, he had a natural expression. Moreover, he was not stupid. Since Su Tianliang hated Zhuowen so much, it was obvious that there was no small grudge between them. He would not be used as a tool for others. Hearing this, Su Tianliang coldly snorted. His gaze was fixed on Zhuowen. He believed that Zhuowen would not easily agree to give his Qingquan bag to Zhu Qi. Once he did not agree, Zhu Qi would still join hands with him to kill this Zhuowen in the end. However, Zhuowen shook his head and coldly said, "Who do you think you are? Why should I give my Qingquan bag to you? If your Imperial Sword Gate's leader, Xian Yuanli, came to ask for my Qingquan bag, perhaps I would give it to him. But who do you think you are?" When these words came out, the surroundings suddenly became silent. Soon after, many people stared at Zhuowen in astonishment. They did not expect that Zhuowen's temper would be so bad. He actually did not give Zhu Qi any face. At this moment, Zhu Qi's face was extremely gloomy. Originally, he did not plan to kill Zhuowen. He only wanted Zhuowen to hand over his Qingquan bag. Then, they would naturally not care about the matter between him and Su Tianliang. However, now that Zhuowen said this, the coldness in his heart became even more intense. A trace of killing intent gradually appeared in his heart towards Zhuowen. As the number one genius of the Imperial Sword Gate, who would not be respectful towards him, who would not give him any face like Zhuowen, this almost made Zhu Qi's lungs explode. Sure enough, you have guts. Originally, Brother Su said that you were arrogant and conceited. I did not believe it. After all, you are only a lowly person from a low-level city. What confidence do you have to be so arrogant and conceited? But now I believe it. An incomparably arrogant brat like you usually ends up in a very miserable state. Zhu Qi coldly said. Su Tianliang's eyes lit up when he saw that Zhuowen was truly angered. He secretly cursed Zhuowen for being brainless. He was actually so arrogant that he did not even take Zhu Qi seriously. After all, Zhu Qi was slightly stronger than him. Even he did not dare to speak so rudely to him. The conflict between Zhuowen and Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi also attracted the attention of the others on the hill. Gazes immediately gathered on Zhuowen, Su Tianliang, and the others. Their gazes were filled with mockery. Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi have actually made trouble for Zhuowen. Looks like Zhuowen is in for it. Zhuowen is alone. Although his performance at Zhongling Mountain was eye-catching, his strength is only at the three-wheel Ultimate Emperor realm. If he offends Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi at the same time, he is basically finished. The surrounding people whispered. They looked at Zhuowen with pity, worry and schadenfreude. However, most of them silently mourned for Zhuowen. After all, Zhuowen's strength was not high. Facing Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi was simply courting death. Luo Xing, Qing Lian, and Lve Tao, who were not far away, also noticed the strange situation on Zhuowen's side. They all frowned slightly. Senior sister Luo Xing, you must help Zhuowen this time. If you don't help, don't stop me. Qing Lian's beautiful eyes were filled with determination as she whispered to Qing Lian. Hearing this, Luo Xing sighed softly and said, Don't worry. I will help this time. After all, Zhuowen saved your and Honglian's lives in the dark forest. It is time to repay this favor. As she spoke, Luo Xing led the team of Jade Lady Astral Court slowly to where Zhuowen was. The people of Jade Lady Astral Court are also here. Do they also want to deal with Zhuowen? When Luo Xing led the team to where Luo Xing was, many of the surrounding people were surprised. Luo Xing, could it be that you want to protect Zhuowen? You have to know that if you want to protect Zhuowen, it means that you have to go against the two super forces of Marquis House of Baichuan and Ruling Sword School. Seeing Luo Xing leading the team to Zhuowen's side, Su Tianliang's eyelids twitched, and he said in a timid voice. Zhu Qi's face also turned ugly. Especially when he looked at Luo Xing, his eyes were filled with coldness. This Zhuowen once saved a disciple of our Jade Lady Astral Court. Jade Lady Astral Court owes him a favor, so I hope you two can give me face and let Zhuowen go. Luo Xing's face was indifferent. Her voice was clear and melodious. Many warriors present showed a touch of infatuation after hearing her melodious voice. On the other hand, Zhuowen glanced at Luo Xing in surprise. He never expected Luo Xing to help him for the first time. He remembered that Luo Xing didn't seem to care at all when the everlasting old man attacked him. However, after seeing Qinglian sticking her tongue out at him beside Luo Xing, he knew that Luo Xing's help was mostly due to Qinglian. Luo Xing, are you really going to help Zhuowen? Zhu Qi suddenly took a step forward as he stared at Luo Xing with bloodshot eyes. A terrifying aura overflowed from his body, as if there was a ferocious beast hidden in his body. Luo Xing frowned. She knew that Zhu Qi had been holding a grudge against her for snatching the title of the second genius, but she did not expect that Zhu Qi would want to attack her. However, Luo Xing was not afraid. After all, She was very clear about the difference in strength between her and Zhu Qi. If they really fought, Zhu Qi would not gain the slightest advantage. Chapter 534. Falling Star Sect. Just when the atmosphere on the hill was at its peak, clear footsteps slowly sounded. Lve Tao, dressed in a white robe, slowly walked over with an indifferent expression. Zhu Qi, let's end this here. Although you can fight freely on the 4th floor of the Tower of Vitality, we haven't even entered the ancient ruins yet. Aren't you afraid of Father's reprimand? Lve Tao paused beside Luo Xing. His eyes narrowed as he stared at Zhu Qi, whose eyes were red and whose aura was boiling. An aura that was many times stronger than Zhu Qi's slowly flowed out, and instantly suppressed Zhu Qi. Feeling the aura from Lve Tao's body, Zhu Qi's pupils shrank. He coldly snorted and withdrew the aura from his body. He glanced at Lve Tao with fear, then stared at Zhuowen and coldly said, "Hee, Zhuowen, you can only hide behind a woman. You're just a coward." Zhuowen could not be bothered with Zhu Qi's low-level provocation. Instead, he glanced at Lve Tao with some surprise. He did not expect that Lve Tao would actually step forward. This was something he did not expect. It seems that this battle is not going to happen. Zhuowen secretly shook his head and felt a little regretful. With his current strength, he was not afraid of Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi joining forces. He originally wanted to teach Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi a lesson, but now it seemed that it was impossible. Zhuowen, take care of your dog life. If you meet us in the ancient ruins, I will personally take your dog life. After Zhu Qi left these words coldly, he directly left the hill with the disciples of the Imperial Sword Sect. He also knew that even Lve Tao had come forward. Killing Zhuowen now was simply a pipe dream. The most important thing now was to hurry up and find the key to the land of inheritance in the ancient ruins. He didn't need to spend all his energy on Zhuowen. After all, he had plenty of time. Su Tianliang glared hatefully at Zhuowen and led the people of Marquis House of Baichuan away from the small hill, heading straight for the scattered ruins in the distance. With Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi's 2 groups taking the lead, the other groups of ancient martial artists on the small hill all revealed a blazing expression on their faces. They all used their movement techniques and rushed towards the distant remains. Although they were not as strong as the 5 super geniuses, the key to the land of inheritance was not something that could be found by relying on strength. It still depended on one's own luck. In an instant, almost half of the cultivators in the small hill had left, and the originally bustling small hill now seemed quite deserted. Sister Luoxing Zhuowen, it's time for me to leave as well. I wish you good luck, and hope that you can obtain the key. As he said, Lve Tao's gaze suddenly landed on Zhuowen and he said, Zhuowen, I hope you can quickly improve your strength. When the time comes, I will compete with you again. Lve Tao stood tall and faintly cupped his hands in obeisance to Zhuowen, Luoxing, and the others. He also led the people of the house of Marquis Qin away from the small hill. Zhuowen, it's rare for Brother Lve to stand up for someone. It seems that he really regards you as his opponent. I'm afraid that when your strength increases, Brother Lve will really find you to compete with. Luoxing's beautiful eyes flashed slightly as she stared at Zhuowen. The corners of her mouth revealed a faint smile. It was as beautiful as 100 flowers blooming. Ouyang Hanxian, who was beside Zhuowen, stared with his eyes wide open. Even Zhuowen could not help but be slightly taken aback by Luo Xing's alluring smile. Luo Xing was indeed worthy of being the #1 beauty in the province. Her every frown and smile carried a peerless charm. In terms of temperament and appearance, perhaps only Mu Qinxue, whom he had met in the ancient cavern, could compete with her. Thinking of Mu Qinxue, Zhuowen's gaze gradually blurred. This time, he could be considered to have completely obtained a place in the top 100 of the Tower of Vitality. He was already qualified to participate in the Battle of the 9 Counties. He was also one step closer to seeing Mu Qinxue. Mu Qinxue, wait for me. In the Battle of the 9 Counties, I, Zhuowen, will definitely fight for the opportunity to be conferred the title of Marquis. Only a Marquis has the qualifications to participate in the entrance examination of Jiaoshan Academy. Slightly clenching his fist, The blurred look in Zhuowen's eyes gradually disappeared and was replaced by a touch of determination. More than 2 years had passed since they parted in the ancient cavern. Zhuowen had also gradually grown from a tender youth to a robust youth. In these 2 years, Zhuowen had not forgotten the promise he had made with Mu Qinxue. Instead, his yearning for her had become even more intense. Even now, Zhuowen could not wait to go to Jiaxin Academy to see Mu Qinxue. However, he also knew that Jiaxin Academy was after all the second greatest power in the eastern lands. In front of such a power, the Qingxian Empire was an ant-like existence. If he went with his current strength, he did not even have the qualifications to enter Jiaxin Academy, let alone see Mu Qinxue. It was precisely because of this reason that Zhuo Wenkai had desperately cultivated for the past 2 years, and had even suffered countless hardships. It was because in his heart, there had always been a beautiful figure that he was concerned about and missed. Zhuowen's sudden absent-mindedness made the corners of Luo Xing's mouth curl into a faint smile. Obviously, she thought that Zhuowen's absent-mindedness was because of her sweet smile. Shaking her head, Luo Xing said softly, "Young Master Zhuo, we also have to leave. I wish you all good luck." Nodding lightly, Luo Xing led the people of Jade Lady Star Court and left. Not long after Luo Xing and the others left, Zhuowen took a deep breath and said to Ouyang Hanxian beside him, "Brother Hanxian, let's go. If we can find the 2 keys this time, we will be qualified to enter the land of inheritance." Unexpectedly, Ouyang Hanxian shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "Brother Zhuo, my strength is too weak. Even if I find the keys, I don't plan to enter the land of inheritance. After all, with my strength, I'm afraid that I won't be able to return alive if I enter that place." Ouyang Hanxian was quite self-aware. This time, he entered the ancient ruins with the intention of finding some powerful treasures. As for the ancient inheritance, it was too far away for him. Hearing this, Zhuowen also nodded. Ouyang Hanxian's words made sense. His strength was indeed a little weak. Entering the land of inheritance would definitely do more harm than good to Ouyang Hanxian. "When we enter the ancient ruins, I will help you get some treasures. This way, you won't have come in vain." After pondering for a while, Zhuowen decided to get some treasures for Ouyang Hanxian. After all, Zhuowen and Ouyang Yuntu had helped him a lot. Such kindness naturally had to be repaid by Ouyang Hanxian. Moreover, Ouyang Hanxian had treated him sincerely, so it was understandable that Zhuowen would help Ouyang Hanxian. "Let's go." With that, Zhuowen and Ouyang Hanxian suddenly turned into 2 streamers and rushed toward the ruins in the distance. Swoosh, swoosh. 2 ear-piercing sounds suddenly sounded. Zhuowen and Ouyang Hanxian suddenly stopped in front of a huge building. This building was extremely dilapidated. However, from the dilapidated traces, Zhuowen could still see that this building was once an extremely magnificent hall. In front of this dilapidated hall, there was a stone arch that was dozens of feet high. However, only half of this stone arch remained. There were a few vague words engraved above the stone arch: Falling Star Sect? Looking at the vague words, Zhuowen muttered, "Obviously, this dilapidated hall should be the ruins of a sect called Falling Star Sect in the ancient times." At this time, in the dilapidated hall in front, there were already a few people who were constantly searching inside. Obviously, they were all trying their luck to see if they could find treasures in this hall. This Falling Star Sect looks quite magnificent. However, it is a pity that it has become so dilapidated now. Standing outside the door and looking at the sect ruins in front of him, Ouyang Hanxian could not help but sigh. Sometimes the power of time was really terrifying. No matter how glorious it was in the past, with the passage of time, the glory would eventually become a thing of the past. "Let's go in and take a look. Maybe we can find some useful clues inside." Zhuowen sighed and nodded. Then, he led Ouyang Hanxian directly into the hall. The arrival of Zhuowen and Ouyang Hanxian also attracted the attention of the rest of the people in the hall. When they saw Zhuowen, they all revealed a trace of fear. Zhuowen's performance on Zhongling Mountain was so amazing. Now these genius warriors who had entered the 4th level could all recognize Zhuowen. Moreover, although in their opinion, Zhuowen's strength was not as good as the 5 super forces. It was actually not too far apart. After all, Zhuowen was a genuine ultimate 3-wheel emperor. Such a cultivation was enough to instantly kill any warrior, except the 5 super geniuses. Zhuowen also felt the vigilance of the others in the hall. He shook his head and ignored those nervous warriors. Instead, he directly led Ouyang Hanxian into the depths of the hall. It had to be said that this hall was really dilapidated. Along the way, there was basically no place that was intact. Looking at these dilapidated scenes, Zhuowen really had some doubts. Would such a hall really have the so-called treasures? There seems to be a situation ahead. Let's go and take a look. Suddenly, Zhuowen let out a soft cry of surprise. Just now, when he was walking, Xiao He in his sea of consciousness suddenly mentioned that there seemed to be some movement ahead. Therefore, Zhuowen immediately became vigilant and began to slowly walk forward. When Ouyang Hanxian saw Zhuowen's vigilant appearance, he was a little puzzled. However, he did not mind, and also followed behind Zhuowen vigilantly. After all, Zhuowen's strength was much stronger than his. Following him would naturally be more secure. At the end of the hall, there was a tunnel on the left. The tunnel's location was extremely remote. If not for Xiao He's reminder, Zhuowen really would not have noticed this remote tunnel. On the other hand, Ouyang Hanxian looked at Zhuowen in surprise. This tunnel was so remote, but it was actually discovered by Zhuowen in advance. In his heart, he naturally believed in Zhuowen even more. Let's go in. Who knows, there might be something good inside. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.